Chapter 531. P.S. Please guarantee the minimum monthly votes. Before immortal elder Yun Shang's voice faded away, an alarm suddenly sounded outside the hall. That was a sound that would only be heard when the mountain gate's great formation was broken through. The three of them came out together, but they saw a young Taoist in the sky with an elegant and graceful bearing. He was holding a white cloud sex Jindan in one hand and gently tossing it down. The two Jindan cultivators were a little dizzy. They only felt that this Taoist came suddenly, and his attack was even more strange. It was not the style of the Hasa Star at all. They were thrown down in front of the three leaders. How could they not feel embarrassed? They shouted together and were about to rush up again with their spiritual weapons. However, they were stopped by a mortal being above clouds. Stop! Master has already shown mercy. You don't even know it. Do you still want to humiliate yourselves? Immortal being above clouds and the other two looked at each other. They could see the surprise in each other's eyes. The three of them are basically the top gold core cultivators on the Whirling Star. Not to mention their cultivation, just based on their life experience. As long as any cultivator on the Whirling Star used their ability, they could almost guess the origin of the other party. Firstly, they were young and experienced, and secondly, they were limited in the domain. However, this person could easily capture two Jindan cultivators of the same realm. His whole body was shining with starlight. He was suspended in the air like a star in the starry sky. Even their divine senses were a little difficult to lock on him. With just a glance, they knew that this kind of cultivation method was a supreme method. It was not something that could be found on the Hasa Star. Then, the origin of this young Taoist was very thought-provoking. Immortal being above clouds controlled his emotions and said, "It is an honor for you to come here. We have been waiting for a long time for you to come here. Since you have come in person, what can I do for you?" Lu Xiaoyi did not treat him as an outsider. He shook his body and entered the hall. "Come in and talk. Don't worry. The stars are shining tonight. It is the time to drink. Let me invite you to drink." Immortal being above clouds and the other two connected their divine senses again. The three of them had already guessed the origin of this young Taoist. All of them were excited. The tumbler was right. The changes that should come finally came. No one was a fool. As the three big sects that controlled most of the areas of the Whirling Star, they had a long history and some inheritances. Even if he didn't know the heavenly upper world personally, it was impossible to say that he didn't know anything about it. In the universe, how could there be a single orthodoxy? The more powerful a realm was, the more impossible it was for it to be a monolithic orthodoxy. If there was only one sword vein, then there would only be one orthodox Taoism sect. It was impossible. Xian Yuan has been controlling Wiruo for thousands of years. Dozens of cultivators have come and gone. Although cultivators are careful with their words, there are always some who are extroverted and talkative. It is inevitable that they will say a few words to Jing. Therefore, whether it is Master Yu of the Qingshu Temple or the F.A. Roly-Poly of the White Cloud School, their so-called waiting was not decided by one person. Rather, it was the decision of the entire school, a decision that lasted for several thousand years. The basis of his judgment was that if the upper realm was really a super large bounded domain, then it was impossible for the sword vein to be the only big one. If there were other orthodoxies, then it would be inevitable for them to compete for resources. The Whirling Star had such a special product as the receiver crystal. Wouldn't it attract the attention of other orthodoxies except the sword vein? This was the opportunity they were waiting for. They didn't want to completely get rid of the control of the upper realm. Unless the Whirling Star's receiver crystal mine was exhausted, they would never be able to escape from the control of the upper realm. But they could make their voices heard in the competition for the receiver crystal resources between different orthodoxies in the upper realm and seek the benefits that belong to the local cultivators. This was the real reason why they waited for thousands of years. But they still needed to confirm it. Although this young man had a technique that no one on the Whirling Star had ever practiced, the universe was so big that anything could happen. After instructing the disciples to guard the door and not allow strangers to get close, they went into the hall one by one. Lu Xiaoyi naturally sat down on the main seat. He looked very relaxed, which made the three Taoists feel an unknown pressure. Master, Yu asked carefully, "Where are you from? Are you passing by or staying here for a long time?" Lu Xiaoyi said casually, "I'm from where I came from. It's not up to me to stop or stay. It depends on the host's hospitality." He didn't want to say where he came from. This was expected by the three Taoists. In the cultivation world, the most taboo thing was to fight openly. No matter what they thought, they always had to leave room for both sides to maneuver. Even a whirling star was like this. Before these upper realm cultivators achieved their goal, of course, they wouldn't reveal their roots. Taoist Zhu Feng tried to sound him out. The flower is divided into two flowers, each showing a branch. Although the whirling star is small, it has two masters. Whether it stops or stays, the words of one master may not be useful. Lu Xiaoyi was unfathomable. The universe is so big. I've never heard of a family with two masters. It's either a single master, a tripod, or a disorder. How long can a two-legged family last? Zhu Feng meant that if you came to the whirling star, would you come into contact with both the Dharma vein and the sword vein? Or would you only come into contact with the Dharma vein? Although this Taoist technique was the most standard Taoist, things were unpredictable. It was better to be clear about some things. Lu Xiaoyi also answered simply, "I only recognize one master." The meaning behind it was memorable. He had never liked to talk like this. It was a pretentious hypocrite. However, in the cultivation world, this was the way to do things. It was also the tradition of the Dharma vein. If he still spoke as straightforwardly as before without any concealment, he wouldn't be able to achieve the effect at all. Immortal being above the clouds pointed out, "However, there's more than one guest. Two masters, two guests, aren't they a good match?" Lu Xiaoyi sneered. "There's only one dish. Who's going to enjoy it? Who's going to eat it? I think that the matters between the masters should be settled by the masters. The matters between the guests should be mediated by the guests. This way, the rules won't be broken. A guest from afar coming to visit, but making a mess in the master's house is not the way of a guest. The master is hospitable, but without a master and servant, it's easy to be at a loss. It's better for everyone to clean the snow in front of their own door." The three of them understood. This Taoist from afar meant that he would deal with the swordsman from the upper realm, but the native sword vein would have to be dealt with by the Dharma veins. This was in line with the tradition of the cultivation world. No one would take care of everything for you. You could only take what you needed yourself. Xin Yuan had been in control of the whirling star for thousands of years. Other than the first time he entered the bounded domain and showed his overwhelming strength, he never showed his strength in front of the Dharma veins again. This should be the way things were done in the upper realm. In order to avoid the karma of destroying the bounded domain, the natives had to do the hard work. Compared to the gains, these sacrifices were not unacceptable. For the whirling Dharma veins, the most intolerable thing was the rise of the sword vein. The benefits of resources were secondary. As for the dignity of the bounded domain, would a low-level cultivation celestial body have any dignity in front of a high-level existence? The three of them were connected and had made a preliminary decision. Chapter 532. Immortal Elder Cloud still wanted to finalize the details. If the guest ends up being a guest at the host house, what kind of gift can he bring? He was asking for benefits. At the very least, it couldn't be lower than the sword veins conditions, right? Otherwise, why would he change the guest? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. How could he bargain? Qinshou Peak didn't give him the right to do so. Moreover, when it came to benefits, once bargaining was opened, there would be countless troubles in the future. After all, there was inflation in the universe. Therefore, he had to suppress this dangerous tendency in the bud. There's no benefit. It might not be as good as the sword veins conditions. However, if the host and guest become friends, they can also invite the host to return at an appropriate time. When Lu Xiaoyi said this, the three old Taoists' eyes immediately lit up. They couldn't help themselves. Resources? What was that to them? It might be meaningful to the disciples below, but to them, who had already reached the ceiling, it was completely meaningless. However, returning to the guest house was meaningful. It was very meaningful. It meant that they could go from a low-level cultivation world to a high-level cultivation world. It meant endless spiritual opportunity. It meant complete heavenly Tao rules. It meant the possibility of going one step further. Lu Xiaoyi's words completely aroused the deepest desire in the hearts of the three people. To them, there was nothing more important than longevity. He didn't talk about benefits at all. Instead, he said slowly, although the guest house is relatively large, it can invite many people at once. The environment is good, but it's more chaotic and the competition is more intense. I can't guarantee anything. To be honest, in terms of comfort and status, it's far inferior to Pessoa. If you go, I'm afraid you'll only be struggling ants at the bottom. Cultivators don't lie. Don't make promises. Don't tempt. If you give up stability, all you will get is an illusory hope. The more Lu Xiaoyi said this, the brighter the three people's eyes became. What they were asking for was nothing more than this hope. Regular visits? Roly-Poly was still confirming. Follow the mining raft. Lu Xiaoyi's meaning was very clear. Once in 100 years. How many cabins are there on a raft? This was asking how many people could go at a time. 3 cabins is the limit. Going too far is as bad as falling short. This was telling them that they could only take 3 cabins at a time. Any more, and it would affect the foundation of Hasa Planet. Immortal Wang Shangyun's heart was set. He knew that the 3 quotas were clearly given to each of the 3 sections. He could not ask for too much, so he had to strike their palms and make an oath. Taoist Zhu Feng, who was beside him, suddenly interrupted him. I've heard that the upper realms techniques lead directly to the Great Path. It's very mystical. I wonder if you can demonstrate it? This Taoist, who had always been impatient and straightforward, was actually very cautious at the last moment. This would depend on his strength. Otherwise, he would not be able to deal with the swordsman from the upper realm in the sword vein. All of this was just a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Lu Xiaoyi smiled without speaking, yet the phenomenon of the stars in his mind had been activated abruptly. Instantly, the 3 of them felt as if they were within a boundlessly vast vortex of stars, and they were unable to struggle or resist it. They were drifting along in the river of starlight. They stirred up their spirits, wanting to escape from such a phenomenon of the stars, but they realized that they were as weak as ants within it. This was the power of Lu Xiaoyi's spirit that had increased tremendously after he formed his aura's core. He was close at hand, and he suddenly activated it. The origin of the stars and the powerful spirit energy made it impossible for the 3 strongest spell cultivators of planet Hasa to escape. Their strength lay in their magical power cultivation, but in the field of spirit, they were far behind. Furthermore, they had never come into contact with the celestial system, so they had no idea how to deal with it. At this moment, if Lu Xiaoyi wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as flipping his hand. In a short time, Lu Xiaoyi withdrew his vortex of stars. He was not really killing them. Furthermore, no matter how strong his spirit was, it was still difficult for him to control 3 late-stage Jin Dan cultivators. Therefore, it was good that he had made his intentions clear. He withdrew it in one go. The atmosphere at the scene was strange. The 3 spell cultivators did not seem to have any abnormalities on the surface, but in fact, each of them sank their spirit into their Naiwen to check if they were injured. What made them feel at ease was that there seemed to be no abnormalities. It was too scary. Such a cultivator who had just advanced to Jin Dan could crush the 3 of them who had formed their aura's cores for more than 1,000 years. The power of the upper realm was incredible. They knew very well that among the cultivators from the upper realm, only those who were in the early stage of Jin Dan could enter planet Hasa. Once the realm was high, it was possible to trigger the heavenly tribulation. However, they were different. They grew up locally and were in line with planet Hasa's heavenly axiom. They would not be affected by lightning. They thought that because of their deeper cultivation, they would always have the right to speak when dealing with the cultivators from the upper realm. Now, it seemed that they had thought too much. In the Jin Dan stage, spirit was more important than magical power. The three of them finally made up their minds. Immortal being above the clouds said seriously, "In that case, please allow us to prepare for a few days. We will immediately set off for the sword vein." "I wonder if Master." Lu Xiaoyi stood up, and his body floated out of the hall. "You know where I am. You just have to inform me before you start." As soon as he left, Zhu Feng and Yu Gong turned their gazes to Tumblr. Tumblr laughed dryly. "He opened a shop in the city. I just found out not long ago, so I didn't have the time to inform you too. Hee. I don't have the ability to predict. I'm just using it as an excuse." The two of them were extremely disdainful. Before this, he was still pretending to be a prophet. However, now is not the time to discuss this. Regarding how to attack the producer of the receiver crystal, although they already had a plan, there were still too many areas that needed to be perfected. The combination of personnel, the route of the army, the level of the attack, the coordination between the inside and outside, and so on. There were too many things to be done. They had waited for thousands of years, just for this east wind. Now that the east wind was here, although it seemed hasty, the three of them were full of confidence. It cannot be fake. The ability could not be faked. The sharpness of the sword vein and the vastness of the stars were two completely different concepts. After cultivating for hundreds of years and coming into contact with countless swordsmen, they still had this bit of insight. The key was that there was already a swordsman from the upper realm coming down from the sword vein. It seemed reasonable for an upper realm spell cultivator to come here. This was the inertia of human thinking. If they missed this opportunity, Lu Xiaoyi would have to put in a lot of effort to obtain the recognition of the spell vein. This was the limitation of the knowledge of cultivators from small places. They did not know that in the upper realm, the cultivation orthodoxies had already begun to integrate in the hundreds of thousands of years of development. There was me and you and me. Purity was no longer synonymous with advancement. The current trend was to have a hybrid advantage. No matter what orthodoxy it was, as long as it was useful to them, they would use it. The fundamental method of the Xianyuan sword vein was basically plagiarized. In the Tao of Arts, the current Taoists had also begun to copy the combat orthodoxies. Only by learning and integrating could they improve. They could not understand it at their current level. Chapter 533. The Sword Vein Mountain was the place with the highest quality of crystal ores on planet Hasa. It was also the territory of the Sword Vein. On top of a mountain peak that was not very tall, several tall and straight figures stood against the wind. Their ancient sword robes, high crowns, and sharp eyes clearly showed their identity. Sword Master. According to the insider news, the Spell Vein Alliance is secretly mobilizing. Judging from the deployment of personnel, it may be true this time. A young Jin Dan swordsman reminded him from behind. The news had been spread a few days ago. On planet Hasa, which was not big, large-scale deployment of cultivators was difficult to hide from the eyes of people who wanted to know. It was the same for the Spell Vein. In fact, it was the same for the Sword Vein. As soon as they gathered here, the Spell Vein Alliance would immediately know. However, the Sword Master had been non-committal, which made the high-level swordsman of the Sword Vein a little confused. The Sword Master Chen Jiang was the most amazing person in the history of the Sword Vein on planet Hasa. He built his foundation at 20 years of age and formed his essence at 100 years of age. His sword skills were unprecedented. Although they were all Jin Dan swordsmen, the core Jin Dan of the Sword Vein knew that even if they joined forces, they might not be a match for the Sword Master. The Spell Vein had more people, but they were not afraid. Because of the tradition passed down from Xianyuan, swordsmen were never afraid to fight against the odds. Moreover, with the Sword Master, they might not be at a disadvantage. Chen Jiang looked into the distance. After a long time, he asked, "Fighting has never been the most important thing. The dispute on planet Hasa can't be solved by fighting. The Sword Vein will not lose, and the Spell Vein will not die. We know this, and they know it too. The question is, why now? The emissary of the upper world has just arrived. Is this the time to start a fight?" No one could answer him, because this was also the question everyone had. Get ready. It's not normal to be completely indifferent. What's the point of talking about tactics in a war between cultivators? Let's gather and fight. Don't leave anyone in the crystal mine. I'll talk to the upper cultivator and see what he has to say. Everyone nodded and scattered in all directions. On Hassa planet, the shadow of the conflict between the sword vein and the law vein had always existed and had never disappeared. Therefore, everyone was mentally prepared for this. In fact, the worst thing was that this kind of preparation would take hundreds or even thousands of years. The fact that the boots were still on the ground made the swordsmen frustrated. To these swordsmen, having a chance to solve the problem meant that they wouldn't have to be on guard all the time for at least hundreds of years. They never thought that they would fail. Because of the sword master, because there was a swordsman from the upper realm. However, this confidence had been lacking for the past 100 years. Due to the mysterious deaths of the swordsmen from the upper realm, they had to bear a heavy burden. Chun Jiang's body swayed as he leaped over a few mountain ridges and landed in a luxurious manner at the foot of Sword Rack Mountain. In the courtyard, a Taoist was closing his eyes in concentration. You shouldn't be here now. Instead, we should be thinking about how to deal with the threat from the Dharma meridians. The Taoist didn't even open his eyes. Chun Jiang was very courteous. Senior brother by tea, the law vein is coming aggressively this time. It looks like they're serious. I'm a little curious. Why did they choose to make a move now? Not long after you came here? We Sword Vein have the confidence to defeat the Law Vein. However, I'm worried that the Law Vein has other plans. If an accident happens, how much support can you give us? Taoist by T spread his hands. I'm new here. How can I know the specific grievances between you two? I have confidence in the scale. When it's time for me to make a move, I'll naturally make a move. However, I want to remind you that Xian Yuan gave you the orthodoxy and inheritance for you to use at critical moments. You shouldn't rely on Xian Yuan for everything. These words were very rude. However, Chun Jiang couldn't refute them. Historically speaking, the orthodoxy of the sword vein on Hassa planet was indeed built by the visitors from Xian Yuan. They struggled for thousands of years to achieve their current achievements. In terms of subordinates, Xian Yuan was their master. They should obey unconditionally. Taoist by Ti's tone softened, and he was no longer aggressive. I'm new to Hassa planet. Of course, my focus should be on Xuan Yuan's most important crystal mine. Therefore, I will guard the mine. As for your battle, an orthodoxy like Xian Yuan has never been afraid because of a small number of people. I've taught you this for thousands of years. Now it's time to take it out and see how good it is. Chun Jiang's eyes were filled with determination. I won't let senior brother down. Taoist by T sighed as he watched Chun Jiang leave in a hurry. However, he couldn't enter the state of concentration like before. He wasn't cultivating at all. He was suppressing his cultivation because a heavenly tribulation could descend at any time. Of course, he was not a swordsman from the Qinxiu Peak in Xianyuan. After Xianyuan sent Lu Xiaoi, if they didn't see the abnormality in his soul lamp, they would never send another cultivator. Xianyuan had many mineral stars like this in the universe. They all needed to be guarded by people. The cultivator's ability, the environment of the star, the possible impact on the cultivator with potential, and other factors had to be considered. Even if Xianyuan was a top sect in the fifth ring, it was impossible for them to take care of everything. It was impossible for them to put several Jin Dan cultivators on a mineral star. It would be a waste. In particular, Hassa planet was very special. It was very difficult to enter and had a special heavenly tribulation. As Lu Xiaoi guessed, he came from a Yunding courtyard of the Three Pure Ones, which was the only swordsman force on the fifth ring that could oppose the Sword Vein. However, he didn't come to Hassa planet recently, as Lu Xiaoi thought. The Three Pure Ones plan was not so shallow. In fact, more than 90 years ago, when Jin Dan, the guardian of Xianyuan, had an accident, the Three Pure Ones got the news through their own channels. It had to be said that the old Dharma branches were very powerful. They were everywhere in the middle and lower levels. When they realized that Xuan Yuan's most important mineral star on Hassa planet had changed, They immediately responded by sending cultivators. Their purpose was to add fuel to the fire and muddy the water. However, the three pure ones were smart. They didn't send Lord Yuanying to rob people, and they didn't even send Jean Dan to cause trouble. They sent a cultivator of Zhuji's stage. At that time, Lu Xiaoyi hadn't even shown off his power at the fish-jumping cliff yet. This was a foolproof plan. Due to the principle of fighting and scheming among the big sects on the fifth ring, one of the most important rules was that the middle and lower level cultivators could do whatever they wanted, especially the cultivators of Zhuji's stage. The purpose of sending a cultivator of Zhuji's stage was that even if the cultivator destroyed your mineral star, it was still within the scope of the rules. If the sword vein couldn't even deal with a cultivator of Zhuji's stage, then they were useless. They wouldn't have the face to wreak havoc on the mineral stars of the three pure ones in the universe, unless they also sent a cultivator of Zhuji's stage to cause trouble. Not only did they destroy the foundation of the sword vein, but they also didn't cause a big conflict in the universe. This was the orthodox way of doing things. They let you know that he was up to no good, but you couldn't find any evidence against him. Turquoise Taoist was a man of sacrifice sent to carry out this task. Chapter 534. Of course, as a laying foundation cultivator, he couldn't cause much trouble on Hasa Star. But don't forget that there were still 70 or 80 years before the next round trip of the mining raft. This period of time was enough for a laying foundation cultivator to become a Jean Dan, because he had the support of the most complete reserves of elixirs of the three pure ones, and he had the potential to break through to the upper state among the three pure ones. Even in a place like the Hasa Star where the rules of nature were not complete, Baihoi easily became a Jean Dan here. But he didn't try to sneak into the sword vein. He knew very well that in a small place like the Hasa Star, when a force wanted to investigate his background, it would be difficult for him, an outlander, to hide. He might as well stay outside first. From this point of view, he was actually as cautious as Lu Xiaoyi. His task was very simple. Taking advantage of the fact that Xianyuan Jean Dan died on the Hasa Star, he waited here for an opportunity to sow discord between the indigenous cultivators and Xianyuan to achieve the purpose of affecting the output of receiver crystals on the Hasa Star. After lurking here for decades, he found that as a casual cultivator, even if he was a Jean Dan, he could still affect the process on a large scale. Those who could reach this level of personal ability were all outstanding cultivators. How could they be easily bewitched? Over the years, the most active thing he did was to kill the second Jean Dan sent by Xianyuan to the Hasa Star. It was not difficult for him. He was just a fake Jean Dan with limited strength. But he was a Jean Dan on the right path. He also had all kinds of trump cards given by the school before he came here, but it was still useless. The connections he had in the Hasa Star for decades only existed in buying and selling receiver crystals of the sword vein among casual cultivators. The purpose of doing this was to make the emissary of Xianyuan dissatisfied with the sword vein of the Hasa Star. In addition, 2 people died in a row. Maybe something would happen. In the world of cultivation, one must be patient. To achieve a goal, killing 1 or 2 people could not solve it. He was alone and weak, and he didn't have enough time. Even if his aptitude was outstanding and his mind was nimble, it would still be very difficult for him to stir up a storm by himself. No matter how weak the Hasa Star is, it is still a mature cultivation system. The power of individuals is very limited. The worst thing was that he realized that he didn't have enough time. The danger came from the whirling environment. When visitors from other regions were in Jean Dan, it was very easy for them to attract heavenly tribulations as long as their cultivation levels were slightly higher. When the 3 pure ones sent him here, they had considered this problem very carefully. Therefore, they sent a foundational cultivator, a special foundational cultivation method, and even a secret potion that could suppress the cultivation level. All these things did help him survive on planet Hasa. However, as his cultivation level increased involuntarily, and he had to increase his strength to protect himself, the secret potion became more and more difficult to hide the growth of his cultivation level. For the past few decades, he had been suppressing himself from entering the middle stage of the Jindan realm because he was afraid that he would not be able to conceal it. But now, he realized that it was getting more and more difficult. His dantian had already swelled up like a drum, and he had entered the stage where he had no choice but to raise his level. So he knew that he didn't have much time left. After careful consideration, he decided to take the risk and use the last resort. He directly pretended to be a messenger of Xianyuan and directly interfered. He had a reason to do so. First, Xianyuan sent the swordsman to guard planet Hasa very slowly this time. Second, he didn't lack Xuanyuan's token, the sword figure. The three pure ones were very careful and had prepared all kinds of plans. This was a difficult task. The purpose of the task was constantly changing as time went on. Compromise. This was the real world of cultivation. Unless you had an overwhelming cultivation level of yuanying, you could only go with the flow here. Under the general trend, neither he nor Lu Xiaoyi could expect the script to evolve according to their own ideas. Billy had realized that the situation was going out of control. The world of cultivation on planet Hasa was indeed getting more and more chaotic, but it didn't seem to be the kind of chaos that he wanted. The strange movements of the cultivators with Dharma meridians made people unable to see the real purpose behind it, so he could only prepare for the worst. His preparation was the crystal mine, which was also the most basic and direct way. It was also the easiest way to expose his real identity. However, considering his limited life, it didn't matter. He had been worried about the cultivators guarding Xianyuan for a long time. He didn't know if Xianyuan had other plans or if Xianyuan had already arrived and was hiding in the dark like him. Anyway, he had realized the danger, so he just needed to go at his own pace. Chun Jiang gathered all the swordsmen on the top of the sword mount. For thousands of years, with the help of Xuanyuan's skills, the sword vein gradually became prosperous. Now, there were more than a dozen Jindan swordsmen. Because of the nature of the orthodoxy, even though the inheritance of the external sword from Xianyuan was not complete, compared with the local Dharma meridians of planet Hasa, all of them were top fighters. This battle will end the dispute between Dharma meridians and swords on planet Hasa for thousands of years. The first is the inheritance of the sword vein, and the second is the gain and loss of the crystal mine. 1 is 2, 2 is 1. I hope that everyone will work hard and fight bravely to determine the status of the sword vein in planet Hasa. His prestige in the sword range was very high. Firstly, it was because of his extraordinary strength. Secondly, it was because of his fairness in handling matters. He was the most outstanding leader of the sword range in the thousands of years since its establishment. It was also under his leadership that the sword range was able to compete with the Dharma range in substance. However, the swordsman's personality determined their way of doing things. They couldn't hold back their words and were unwilling to hold back their thoughts. One of the Jindan said loudly, "Swordsmen should move forward bravely without fear of death." We don't need the sword master to tell us this. What we want to know is this battle for the sword vein? Or is it for Xianyuan from the upper realm? If it's for Xianyuan, why isn't BD participating? Even if it's just for show, isn't all of this caused by the receiver crystals from the upper realm? This Jindan's words resonated with many swordsmen. Chun Jiang sighed. Every family had their own difficulties. In the sword vein, the biggest difficulty was that when the swordsmen grew stronger, the idea of independence became the mainstream. They didn't want to continue being a miner from the upper realm. Their lifelong pursuit was to manage the mine well and receive the tributes. This was what humans were like. They were never satisfied and always pursued independence. They would never be loyal to you for a lifetime or several lifetimes just because you gave them food when they were in trouble. Perhaps in the early days of the sword vein on planet Hasa, those few generations were grateful to Xianyuan for his help. However, after hundreds and thousands of years, this gratitude became weaker and weaker. They were more willing to treat the relationship between the two parties as equals. You provided me with skills and resources, and I gave you precious receiver crystals in return. This was a form of transaction. There was no dominant or dominant relationship. It might sound ungrateful and ungrateful, but in reality, this was the trend in any world. There was no debt of gratitude that could last for hundreds or thousands of years. Chapter 535. P.S. Happy Double Festival. Happy forever. For your happiness, no matter how hard I work, it's worth it. During the double event period, please cast your vote. After this period, the double effect will no longer be available. Happy holidays, good food, good books, and sloth will sing for everyone here. Chen Jiang had to suppress this thought. Before he understood Xuan Yuan's attitude, he couldn't let his junior brothers do whatever they wanted. If you can't defeat the challenge of the Dharma lineage, if you can't prove yourself, it's useless no matter what you think. If you want to negotiate with the upper realm, you have to at least show your worth. Chen Jiang pointed to the west. He already understood that this collision of the Dharma sword and Dharma sword would have a profound impact on the cultivation world of Hasa's star. He just didn't know if the final result would be as they wished. Lu Xiaoyi and the Hasa star's Dharma lineage were flying in the sky together. Their target was the east. More than 50 Jindan had taken up half of the Dharma lineage. In this regard, Hasa star was stronger and more aggressive than his home planet. This was also a disguised form of the saying, one is marked by one's environment. If you were close to the Chaowang realm, you could only live your own life. If you were close to the fifth ring, all kinds of situations were inevitable, whether you liked it or not. His thoughts were a little scattered, based on the time and distance. After nearly 200 years, the fifth ring's current trajectory was beginning to approach the airspace of his home planet. Right? Unfortunately, he was still a Jindan who couldn't fly across the universe. Even if he could become a nascent soul one day, he would definitely have crossed this airspace long ago. It was melancholy. He quickly pulled his thoughts back. He actually wasn't sure about the current situation. In his intuition, he realized that his preparations for the past 2 years were actually a bit of a waste of time. Not everyone had the talent to deal with cultivation affairs. It was easy to think, but difficult to do. Ambition was higher than the sky, but luck was thinner than paper. A lot of plans and considerations were made, but the end result was that they were useless. In fact, this was also the problem of most cultivators, including the sects and forces. In the end, you would understand that plans were meant to be changed, and planning was meant to cause accidents. Many great events were actually the continuous collisions of countless accidents and coincidences, especially when your realm and strength were not enough to dominate an area. His intuition told him that the problem lay with the sword vein itself. From the moment he accepted this mission, he had this feeling. This was because Qinqiu Peak's method of dealing with the whirling planet's mineral source was missing a very important part. They did not give this low-level cultivation realm a way to progress. Why did this happen? There could be many reasons for this. It was inconvenient to enter and exit the whirling star. Xin Yuan was not willing to accept Jindan cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi was also born in the mortal world. He could understand the desire of the cultivators in the mortal world. When generations of cultivators were injured at the Yuanian Gate, they were unwilling to give up. This was especially true for sword cultivators with unruly ideals. If they didn't have such a philosophy, they wouldn't be real swordsmen, and they wouldn't have understood the true meaning of being a swordsman. If such a belief was formed, it was only a matter of time before something happened. That was why he started with the Dharma vein. As he expected, the Dharma vein was still as stable as their orthodoxy. This was also something determined by their beliefs. As for the fake Xinyuan emissary, he even suspected that it was just a self-directed act by the sword vein. Everyone was wearing a mask, so an outsider like him couldn't really blend in. It was harder to find the truth by investigating. The best and fastest way was to create or provoke a fight. Find possible clues in the fighting and killing, and discover the truth. He was a person who didn't want to do anything, but as long as he did something, he wanted to do it to the best of his ability. Maintaining the next mineral source was the simplest task. With the ability of his sword, he could easily do this. This would also make all the conspirators wary and not dare to act rashly. However, what about after he left? The problem was still not solved. The swordsman sent by Xian Yuan would still be in danger. He, Lu Xiaoyi, shouldn't let others clean up after the places where he, Lu Xiaoyi, had taken action. He already had a little of the swordsman's pride. This was not a massacre. He was just bringing forward the time of the conflict between the two sides. Perhaps he could find something from this. He could only take advantage of conflicts and blood feuds. If both sides were at peace, then he wouldn't be able to gain anything. Planet Hasa was a very special place. Some of the abilities of major cultivators could not be used here. Yuanying, forceful suppression, and mental invasion was a very simple task. But now, it required a Jin Dan like him to rack his brains. A figure approached them, and at the same time, a familiar voice sounded. The sword vein has gathered all the swordsmen and is ready to fight. A total of 14. However, the swordsman from the upper realm didn't follow them. I heard that he's guarding the crystal mine alone and watching the tigers fight. Seeing the meaningful look in Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, Immortal Elder Cloud was afraid that there might be some misunderstanding and hurriedly covered it up. Come, let me introduce the two of you. The two of you have known each other for a long time, but you're both working for different masters. It's not for personal gain, it's for official business, so it's understandable. He pointed at Bluebeard. This is the head of the foreign elders of the Law Lineage Alliance. The Law Lineage Alliance is a three-legged alliance, but it's actually a four-legged alliance. Fellow Taoist Blue has a group of like-minded individual cultivator friends. With them, the Law Lineage Alliance's spies are everywhere. Planet Hasa's size is limited, and every Jin Dan is precious and conspicuous. If you don't form your gold core here, your aura will be like a firefly in the dark night. Fellow Taoist may not feel it, but we can see it with a single glance. Fellow Taoist Blue was appointed by me, but I didn't deliberately deceive you. Please forgive me. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. He wasn't that weak and couldn't take a blow. Wasn't it just an error of judgment? For a little Jin Dan like him who didn't have enough experience, it was normal. After all, people always had to grow. Compared with these 100 or even hundreds of years old Jin Dan, inexperience was nothing. Moreover, he didn't treat this person as a friend from the beginning to the end. It was his first time in Hasa, so he still had some precautions. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Blue, you cheated me so hard. I thought I could have a friend in Hasa. But since it's Immortal Elder's idea, those receiver crystals are also the treasures of the Law Lineage. I'll ask for more when I go back. Is that okay?" Taoist Blue was in fear and trepidation. It's a sin to offend the master of the upper realm. But I don't have any bad intentions. I was just curious and knew that Immortal Elder didn't have any evil intentions. So I went to investigate. The power of the upper realm is not something we small worlds can offend. It's just that Hasa has been a bit unpredictable recently. In order to protect myself, I have to be careful. If I've been rude, please don't blame me. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled, and the matter between them was over. Since then, all his schemes after coming to Hasa had basically failed. He just didn't know when these Law Lineage cultivators started to notice him. Did it start after he came to the Middle Realm? Or did it start in Shizhao City? It was a lesson to never think that you're smart. If you don't have the strength to crush others, don't have the mentality of playing in the mortal world. Otherwise, you'll be a joke in the eyes of others. He still had a long way to go in the future. It was not too late to understand this now. He was very grateful to these cunning guys. They were also good teachers and helpful friends on his path of cultivation. The key was not to be deceived. The important thing was that he could learn something from it. Without Su Anyuan's powerful support, he was just a little Jin Dan with stupid strength, who would recognize a fish jumping into a sword. Chapter 536. These were all trivial matters. The real issue was, what should they do about the swordsman who was guarding the crystal mine alone? Should they ignore him? Or should they send someone to deal with him? Who should they send? Everyone looked at Lu Xiaoyi. It was obvious that none of the local cultivators were willing to do this. Spying on a swordsman from the upper realm would only bring hatred to himself and his sect. There is only one person who was most suitable. Could this be a trap? Did the sword vein dig it for him? Or did the Dharma vein dig it out? However, if he did not step in, he would never know the real reason behind the chaos on planet Hassa. I'll go. But where's the crystal mine? Which fellow Taoist can lead the way? The tumbler, Yu Gong, and Ju Feng were still hesitating, but Bluebeard took the initiative to step forward. I've offended you first, Master, so I need a chance to make up for it. I'm quite familiar with the crystal mine. I often trade some private goods with my friends. Why don't I lead you there to make up for my previous regret? The three of them clapped their hands and laughed, nodding. Lu Xiaoyi was also very carefree. Since Bluebeard was so open-minded, how could he be stingy? Hence, the two of them left the group and changed their direction slightly. Bluebeard praised, Master's escape technique is truly a supreme technique from the upper realm. His body is free and unrestrained, and he moves freely. Looking at it from the front and looking at it from the back, it's fascinating. This beard's knowledge is limited, but when I examine his breath, could it be related to the stars in the universe? Lu Xiaoyi was still very humble. Just call me by my name. Don't call me Master. I was just born in a good place. Compared to your hardships here, we so-called masters are ashamed. Brother Bluebeard, what's so special about the mine on Jinji Mountain? Why is it worthy of being guarded? The cave is narrow. It's hard for people of our level to use our skills, especially for a swordsman. Isn't it suicide? Bluebeard explained. The geological conditions of the whirling star are quite special. It is clay, so it is easy to dig holes. The Na crystals are hidden in it, so the holes are deep and wide. It doesn't affect the cultivators fighting in it. The mines of Jinji Mountain were of the highest quality. They were usually heavily guarded, with Jean Dan on duty and formations set up. It was very difficult to sneak in. I'm guessing that this person is guarding the mine because he's afraid that someone will deliberately destroy it. This receiver crystal has its secrets too. Lu Xiaoyi did not pretend to be knowledgeable. Secret? Tell me about it. Bluebeard was very modest. Actually, it might not be a secret. It's just that recently, everyone has been spreading a rumor. It was said that the reason why Hassa planet was rich in kaleidoscopes, which could effectively transmit spiritual power, was that there was some kind of magical spiritual object in the depths of the crypt. Otherwise, how could there be such a mineral? As for what exactly it was, everyone had different opinions, and so on and so forth. It's probably something like spiritual marrow, strange beasts, rock cores, and so on. Anyway, it's something with spiritual power. It's precisely because of such an existence that minerals like receiver crystals are produced. In fact, it's the result of the long-term influence of spiritual power of the spiritual object. It intersects with a kind of very ordinary crystal, and the result is receiver crystals. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, "You mean if someone can capture this kind of spiritual object for their own use, they can achieve the purpose of destroying the formation of receiver crystals?" Bluebeard waved his hand. "Master, I'm not taking the blame for this. This is not what I said, but what everyone said. If you ask me what I think, I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. How can I easily participate in this kind of thing? I'm just a small individual cultivator. I can't even lose my life in it. Who can I find a reason with?" Things were getting more and more interesting. After coming to Hassa Planet for 2 years, it was no longer peaceful, even if there was a faint murderous intention behind it. Lu Xiaoyi changed the topic. "Brother Bluebeard, since you already know my identity, are you interested in leaving Hassa Planet and going to the upper realm to broaden your horizons? I think the reason why you're leading the way for me is because you have other ideas, right?" Bluebeard heard his straightforwardness and replied quickly, "To tell you the truth, I really have this idea, but since the Master has already decided on the 3 of us, how can it be my turn? The old immortal said that the Dharma Lineage Alliance is a 4-way alliance, which is flattering me in front of outsiders. I do have some individual cultivator friends, but you also know that the reason why individual cultivators are individual cultivators is because they are not restrained. Usually they can call their friends to buy and sell things, but when it comes to desperate times, people like us who are not bound by orthodoxy, who would be willing to fight to the death. It's already good enough to have a few people to wave the flag and shout for you. The Dharma Lineage Alliance only has 3 legs. I'm just a manager who runs errands and does odd jobs. I'm just earning some commission and getting some information. Of course, if there's a chance, I will fight for it. This is the reason why I came to the mine with the Master. In terms of strength, I may not be able to help much, but I can always do some side business. If the Master is satisfied, I also hope to have such an opportunity. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I won't make empty promises. It depends on the opportunity. On Hasa Planet, I'm deaf and blind. If there's any trouble, as long as you can remind me in advance, everything is possible. The two hurriedly reached an agreement during the flight. A few days later, they began to approach Jianji Mountain. Bluebeard was indeed familiar with the terrain. In order to get a chance to go to the upper realm, he worked very hard. He chose a path that was rarely visited by people and approached without being discovered. Of course, this was also the reason why the swordsman Jean Dan came out empty-handed. How could the remaining Foundation establishment cultivators notice their whereabouts? Jianji Mountain was not a very majestic mountain. In fact, if one only looked at the layout, this place was actually not suitable to be the location of a Taoist orthodoxy. However, since it was built on the basis of a receiver crystal mine, other things did not matter. At the foot of Jianji Mountain, there was a huge cave. The entrance of the cave was more than 1,000 feet wide. It was obvious that this cave was dug by manpower. There were a few miners going in and out of it. Most of them were mortals, but there were also Foundation establishment cultivators patrolling back and forth. Bluebeard lowered his voice. It's here. There's a formation at the entrance of the cave. If the information is correct, other than the swordsman from the upper realm, there shouldn't be any other Jean Dan cultivators guarding the cave. Lu Xiaoyi narrowed his eyes and sighed in his heart. He was traumatized by caves. This was because senior brother Guang Bei had died in such an environment. Should he stay outside and wait for the rabbit to come out, quietly observe everything that happened, and then settle the matter peacefully? Or should he put himself in danger and take the initiative to seek answers? If it was in the past, he would never enter, but now he had to enter. Not to mention anything else, just for the swordsman's heart in his heart. If he could not escape, where else could he escape to? It was easy to escape from the real world, but there was nowhere to escape from the cage in his heart. Who could guarantee that all the battles in a cultivator's life would be in an environment that he was best at? If he escaped this time, what about the next time? There would always be one that he could not avoid. When that time came, he was afraid that this fearless spirit would be gone. What was the point of practicing the sword then? He did not want to delay any longer. It was time to end it. Chapter 537. How do we get in? Bluebeard asked. Lu Xiaoyi replied straightforwardly. Just barge in. Is there need to be so sneaky here? It'll be a joke. Instead of burdening yourself with psychological pressure, it's better to do it openly and let the other party worry. Brother, are you going in with me or are you going back? Bluebeard smiled awkwardly. I think I'd better not go in, but I'm not going back either. I'll wait at the entrance. Lu Xiaoyi laughed it off. The biggest taboo for local cultivators, especially rogue cultivators, was to offend forces, especially the mysterious forces from the upper realm, so it was understandable. Without another word, he slammed his body into the formation at the entrance of the cave. He had already passed through the formation, leaving behind a ringing alarm, a flickering light, and a restless and disorderly spiritual aura. It felt as if the earth was quaking and the mountains were shaking. This collision was not a collision of confidence, but an opportunity to break through the mental barrier. Inside the cave was an incomparably huge space. It was 1,000 feet in length and width and several hundred feet in height. It was barely enough for cultivators to move around. The frightened mortals and cultivators rushed out of the dozens of tunnels connected by the space. Although they didn't know what had happened, in such an environment, the only thing they could do was to run out of the cave and escape if there was a slight tremor. Lu Xiaoyi did not care about the fleeing crowd. He only hovered in the air, waiting for them to leave. The reason why he used such an earth-shattering method to enter the cave was mainly for the sake of these mortals and low-level cultivators. He could not guarantee that there would not be a battle in the tunnel. Once a battle started in such a terrain, it would definitely bring about many innocent casualties. This was not what he wanted, so the purpose of this collision was to scare the crowd away. After waiting for an hour, he felt that there were no signs of life in the depths of the tunnels. This was also the principle of mortals working for cultivators. If there was a problem, it was right to run. No one would blame you, including the low-level cultivators. Only fools would hide and scheme. In a battle between high-level cultivators, it was very common to involve the innocent. If one was not smart enough, he could not blame anyone. Lu Xiaoyi was not worried that his actions would wake anyone up. In this situation, it was not a race against time. If the opponent really had a plan, it would not be less than an hour. Instead, he hoped that the other party would come out to greet him. Unfortunately, this Li Gui was clearly not a swordsman. Because the tunnel was very wide, it was much easier and faster than the cave of the North-Gazing clan in the Wolf Ridge. His divine sense was also less affected by the refraction. In addition, he now had Jin Dan's divine sense. Lu Xiaoyi quickly figured out which tunnel was the main tunnel and which was the main tunnel. After all, this place was dug for mining, not for trapping people. Most importantly, he had the map of the mine. It was from 100 years ago, so it shouldn't be too bad. Following the main tunnel, Lu Xiaoyi slowly moved forward. Breaking the mental barrier was one thing, but being cautious was another. His divine sense swept deeply into the wall. Occasionally, he would even use his flying sword to cut and stab. This was to prevent any hidden traps or formations along the way. This was a low-level cultivation world. Formations were not that strong. Even if there was the existence of a cloud-top swordsman, with their level, they would not be able to set up a Yuanying level formation that would cause people to be helpless. As he moved forward, the tunnel did not become narrower. Instead, it became wider. This was the advantage of clay. It was easy to dig, and there was no need to worry about collapsing. The main tunnel went all the way down. It was in the shape of a slanted staircase. It was not steep. This was dug for the convenience of mortals. It was not like the cave in the North-Gazing clan. Mortals could not go down without a rope. Along the way, there were countless tunnels extending to both sides. They were all relatively short and shallow. Once his divine sense swept through, he would know. Other than a few mortals who were scared silly hiding and trembling inside, there was nothing worth looking at. After chasing them away, Lu Xiaoyi slowly began to descend. During this process, the interception of luck in his sea of consciousness began to change. If there was a change in interception of luck, it would definitely mean that something inexplicable would happen. It was not clear whether it was good or bad. But to him, he was facing a choice. Should he follow the warning of luck or follow his own challenge to himself? Would he become a person who was controlled by luck from now on? Would he advance if his luck was smooth and retreat if his luck was dark? How could everything be smooth in one's life? If he retreated at the slightest danger and setback, that was not cultivation. Cultivation, in essence, was a process that defied the heavens. But ever since he had this luck, he often acted according to luck. Was this progress? Or was it regress? What if one day, what he wanted to do conflicted with what his luck allowed? Would he not do it? Would he cower? Would he convert to the will of the heavens and become a docile citizen? He did not want to become such a person. He wanted to be himself. He would do what he had to do and what he wanted to do. Who cared about luck? When he was eating qi and building his foundation, he did not have enough power. But now, while he had a certain amount of power, he also hoped that he had a swordsman's heart that was worthy of this power. Therefore, even if this adventure was somewhat pointless, and it was a cave that swordsman was very wary of, and there was a change in interception of luck, he still wanted to challenge it and be presumptuous for once. He should not become a mysterious slave, even if it was luck that made everyone in the cultivation world pale at the mention of it. He continued to descend, neither fast nor slow. He wanted to give the few mortals who were hiding enough time to get out. In the fifth ring, In his first cultivation lesson, the relationship between cultivators and mortals was the most important thing. Now it had become an instinct. Finally, in the image of his divine sense, there was a space in front of him that was even larger than when he first entered the mine. This was not marked on the map, so it could be imagined that this was the progress of the excavation in the past 100 years. More importantly, he could faintly feel the aura of cultivators there. The unexpected occurrence, Xianyuan Jindan's death, was very likely related to this new space. At the same time, the preparations he had made in the past 2 years were somewhat laughable. What if he had simply revealed his identity to the Sword Vein? His so-called investigation was somewhat laughable, but before the truth came to light, he could not say whether his previous preparations were meaningful or not. Thinking back carefully, he had carefully explored all the tunnels along the way. The entire mine maze was incomparably clear under the positioning of his stars. The sword was in the case, and the will was in the chest. Who cared about luck? As soon as he stepped into the space, he was shocked to find that this was not a man-made space, but a natural geocentric cave. The most amazing thing was that in the center of the cave, there was a blue stone bamboo shoot with a diameter of more than 100 feet. It was shining in the dark space. It was unknown how deep its roots were, but just a small part of it was enough to give rise to endless thoughts. He came early in the morning to rush to the market late at night. He thought that he was clever, but he had wasted 2 years of his time. It was also destined. Chapter 538. Beside the bamboo shoot, a Taoist sat cross-legged. When he saw Lu Xiaoyi's celestial teleportation, he frowned. Wushang shouldn't have sent people here. This doesn't conform to the original agreement. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Agreement? There's an agreement between Wushang and the 3 Pure Ones? The Taoist sighed. Lu Xiaoyi immediately knew that he had answered wrongly. He could pretend to be a Dharma cultivator in front of the Hassa natives, but he could never do so in front of the 3 Pure Ones. Enemies know you better than friends. This was not a joke. Dharma cultivators always had their own way of communicating. It could be intuition or secret signal. There was no way to fake it. No matter how this Taoist tried to hide it, he could not get rid of the arrogance of the 3 Pure Ones. Both sides realized that they could not hide their identities, nor did they need to. Xianyuan and the 3 Pure Ones have been fighting for tens of thousands of years. Karma had long been integrated into their bones and blood. Although they did not speak ill of each other, they both knew that there could only be one person who could walk out of here alive. Beatty was very polite. I am Beatty, from the 3 Pure Ones Yunding Courtyard. I am curious why Xianyuan delayed sending you here for more than 10 years. The receiver crystal is so important to your external sword. You shouldn't be so lazy. Or do you think that no one will dare to mess with the swordsman because the universe is peaceful? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. You're still interested in these questions? If I were you, the first thing I would think about is how to survive. What is this? Was it dug up recently? Beatty spoke calmly, as if he was talking to an old friend. I don't know the exact time. These natives are very cunning. But based on my judgment, it should have been before the death of the first swordsman after Xianyuan left with the mining raft. If you ask me, Xianyuan is strong, but he's not very smart. He has been mining receiver crystals for thousands of years, but when he found something, there was an immediate change. If it were the 3 Pure Ones, it would not have gone out of control. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. He asked humbly, what would you do? Billy said without hesitation, give them a way out. Every 100 years, when the mining rafts arrive, a few people can be selected to take them to the 5th ring. This way, they will have a way to progress. They can deal with the abnormalities below by themselves. You don't have to worry about it. Lu Xiaoyi asked, the 5 rings aren't willing to accept people who already have their own ideals. Also, control is a problem, BD said disdainfully. Who knows if they'll really be sent to the 5th ring? What if something happened midway? There were countless adaptations, so why would it become a problem? Fellow Taoist, you make Xianyuan sound like the Holy Church, but when it comes to killing people, which power can compare to your Xianyuan? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. That's different. He couldn't be bothered to argue. Swordsmen had always been disdainful of words when facing an enemy. Just kill. But the situation now was different. He needed to know more from this cloud-top swordsman. He was already disappointed with the natives. The useful information he obtained was not as useful as the three pure ones. Therefore, he didn't mind waiting a little longer. Did you kill the 2 cultivators stationed in Xinyuan? Billy shook his head and said sincerely, I only killed the second one. As for who killed the first one, that's a mystery. Take a guess. Is it the Dharma vein or the sword vein that you all nurtured? Lu Xiaoyi was equally sincere. I'm guessing that someone in the sword vein is stirring up trouble. You're not sure if it's the entire sword vein or one of them. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have investigated the Dharma vein. If I had come here first, would it have been better? At least you wouldn't have been able to enter the mine so easily. Billy was very satisfied with his honesty. Although they were on opposite sides, they were opponents who respected each other. You didn't make a big mistake. Maybe we're more scheming in the 5th ring, so we're always thinking from an abnormal angle. When I first came to Hassa, I also thought that the sword vein was stirring up trouble, just like you. But our way of dealing with it was the opposite. You went to the Dharma vein to verify it, while I came to the sword vein to verify it directly. We can't talk about who's better and who's worse. These natives are more cunning than you think. This has nothing to do with the level of the realm's cultivators. He smiled. You came to the sword vein first, so it won't affect anything. Although I've just pretended to be an emissary from Xinyuan, I've been to this place more than once. Do you think that the 3 pure ones won't be able to deal with a lower realms array with our attainments in array formations? Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. I forgot about that. Of course, you can't be as brute as me. You probably know that I'm from Xinyuan from the way I entered the array, right? You've been here for so many years. Aren't you worried that you'll be targeted by the heavenly tribulation if your realm increases? BD smiled. The 3 pure ones have their own methods. I can't tell you about this, so please forgive me. You see, I've answered almost all of your questions, but you haven't answered mine. This doesn't seem to be in line with the Xinyuan swordsman's honesty. I really want to know why you're so late by 10 years. All of my plans were made to guard against you, but the result is that I'm afraid of you. After waiting for 10 years, I want to know the result. Isn't that too much? Lu Xiaoyi was very sympathetic. No, I'm late. I apologize. As for the reason, it's not complicated. The 2 guards died, and it's a matter of receiving crystals. Of course, Chinshou Peak attached great importance to it. It's also because of this that they decided to send Jean Dan, who can solve the problem. You know, the outer swordsman doesn't like to ask for inner swordsman. Coincidentally, I've reached the core formation stage, so they waited for me for 10 years. They let me consolidate a little and set off immediately. The conversation between the 2 was more intimate than that of best friends. They didn't hide anything. They both knew that even if the other knew, what could they do? They couldn't get out alive, so they could only take the secret to the netherworld. Especially Taoist BD, who had been on Hassa Star for nearly 90 years, was annoyed by these natives. He missed the time when he was entangled with Xinyuan. Hassa Star only allows early core formation stage cultivators to come here. The sooner, the better. This is common sense, but I don't understand. In Xinyuan, there are tens of thousands of outer swordsman Jean Dan under the Chinshou Peak, and there are no less than 100 new Jean Dan cultivators. Why are they waiting for you alone? Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. I didn't want to boast, but since everyone wants to tell the truth, I can't hide it from you. When I was in the foundation building stage, I was Xuanyuan's senior fellow apprentice. Later, I went to the fish leaping cliff to stab the sword. Thanks to everyone's mercy, I barely survived. So the elders thought that there was probably nothing that could stop me. Of course, I'm talking about fighting. Sometimes my brain is muddled. BD heaved a sigh of satisfaction. It was much better to fight a battle of wits and strength with his old rival. Both of them used the truth to stimulate the other to speak more truth and put pressure on the other. This was the life of a cultivator he wanted. Unfortunately, there was no time. Then, I still want to congratulate you. But the glory when I was in the foundation building stage doesn't represent the glory I have now. I didn't come here to achieve my goal by fighting. Our Dharma meridians are like this, you know? Chapter 539. P.S. Begging for votes at the beginning of the month. Double the period, one vote, one get one free. If you miss this opportunity, you won't get another one. Sloth has prepared the 7th watch for you tonight. End of story. He's bedridden. He's spending more than he's earning. He needs monthly votes to prolong his life. Lu Xiaoyi was also curious. You'll definitely encounter the real Xian Yuan swordsman here. Have you ever considered your own safety? What's the point? Would the 3 pure ones dare to take away a receiver crystal from here? Beatty smiled as usual. Of course not. You're a sword maniac. If we cut off one lifeline of Xian Yuan, you'll definitely cut off 2 lifelines of the 3 pure ones. So we can't use force. As for my safety, I'm not in any danger now. I can't suppress my realm anymore. I'm afraid that if I don't do it now, I won't have the chance in the future. That's why I took the risk and pretended to be Xuan Yuan's emissary. That's why I could enter the mine on the Dafa's side and complete my final arrangements. I've been waiting for you to come to tell you that the 3 pure ones are within the limits of the rules. We didn't cross the line. Lu Xiaoyi casually put on a hat. It's Xuan Yuan's fortune to have opponents like the 3 pure ones. We'll improve together. Can I see what kind of trump card you've prepared? Is it this bamboo shoot rock? What's it connected to below? Beatty gladly accepted his opponent's praise. This was what he deserved. After decades of forbearance, he successfully formed his Aurus core, killed Xuan Yuan's Jin Dan, figured out the general secret of the mine, and then coincidentally obtained the ability to deal with this secret. He deserved it. He shifted his body to the side. You can look down through the bamboo shoot rock. You'll know what I'm doing. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands and muttered, You Dharma cultivators are always like this. Why don't you just fight to the death when there's a conflict? Why do you have to make it so complicated? Walking to the side of the blue bamboo shoot, he wasn't worried that Beatty would do anything. This was confidence that came from the bottom of his heart. He focused his gaze on the bamboo shoot and felt a blue halo surrounding him. His divine sense seemed to have penetrated through an endless distance. It was so far away that he seemed to have seen the depths of the Earth's core. A big turtle was slowly climbing up. Lu Xiaoyi carefully observed the turtle for quite a while, then raised his head and asked, I seem to feel something mysterious. Is this your doing? Billy smiled warmly. It's not my doing. It's the big turtle's trick. Since you've seen it, you can only wait here for it to come up. You can't be more than 300 meters away from the bamboo shoots. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to tell you this taboo. Lu Xiaoyi's body flickered, but he stopped when he was only 500 feet away. Then he turned back. Fellow Taoist, you really know how to joke. What taboos are there? Under my Xuan Yuan's escape skill, nothing in the world can stop me. Billy laughed even more happily. Of course, it was the limit of 500 feet. The reason why he said 300 feet was that he didn't want this swordsman to have any special tricks. Now, it seemed that he couldn't escape just like him. He was telling the truth, but he didn't tell the whole story. The reason why the Hasa star produces receiver crystals is that there's an old turtle in the depths of the Earth's core. It's an extremely ancient existence. Its realm and ability are unknown, but it can influence all kinds of minerals around it to transform them into receiver crystals that can transmit spiritual power. This shows that the old turtle has something special about its spirit. In another environment, it can't escape from the treatment of human grand cultivators. However, on the Hasa star, grand cultivators can't enter because they are afraid of heaven's doom, so they can avoid the tribulation of man. Even the immortal of Xian Yuan can't find it. Less than 100 years ago, the sword vein opened up this space and found this secret. However, it wasn't a secret, so it spread like wildfire. Treasures can move people's hearts. This is the truth of the cultivation world. Even Xian Yuan can't suppress the greed of human beings. The first golden core cultivator, Xian Yuan, had died after this discovery. Obviously, he wanted to send this news back to the dome of the fifth ring, but unfortunately, someone didn't want him to do so. After the second Jin Dan came, he got along very well with the indigenous people. He didn't care much and didn't even enter the mine. He only focused on his own cultivation. The indigenous people probably thought that he had deceived the emissary of Xianyuan, and they didn't want to offend the forces of the upper world. So, they wanted to let him go. However, the indigenous people didn't know, but it doesn't mean that I don't know. He's just a fake core cultivator. So what future does he have? He pretended to cultivate just to cover up the fact that he already knew the truth, so I took action. Liu Xiaoyi praised, fellow Taoist, by his really decisive and straightforward. However, I'm curious about one thing. How can cultivators like you and I, who are in the Jindan realm, break the seal of such a strange object? You're taking it for granted, aren't you? Bai Ti shook his head and pointed at him. You're purely thinking like a swordsman. You only consider the problem from the perspective of combat power. Yes, in terms of combat power, not to mention Jindan like us, even a perfected person would be helpless. It's an existence that only a supreme or a sun god supreme can contend with. However, from the perspective of Orthodox Taoism, combat and sealing are two different things. Just because I can't beat it doesn't mean that I can't release it. This is the limitation of your understanding of the sword vein. Liu Xiaoyi felt that it made sense, but there were still some problems. So you broke the seal and waited here for this thing to slowly crawl out? You did it now because you felt that your time was up, so you pretended to be a Xianyuan emissary to guard alone. And after I saw it here, I could only stay here with you and wait for it to crawl out and treat us as its first meal after regaining its freedom. At the same time, it also destroyed the foundation of the receiver crystal. After hundreds or thousands of years, without the influence of the old turtle, no new ore will be produced, and Xuanyuan's flying sword will be impossible to refine. Bai Ti sighed. Basically, that's the case. But there's one thing. The refining of Xuanyuan's external sword can only be said to be troublesome. You have to look for a substitute everywhere, but I believe that with Xuanyuan's ability, you can always find one. If you can't find one, you can always rob it. In the end, it's just a problem, not a hopeless situation. How can I, a mere cultivator, push Xianyuan, such a great force, into a hopeless situation? Who would believe it? Liu Xiaoyi also sighed. Then what are you after? Bai Ti's eyes were blurred. My loyalty to my sect. My hatred of 3 generations of elders in my family who were killed by Xuanyuan's swordsmen. My whole family will be included in the meritorious family of the 3 pure ones and enjoy the best treatment for generations after I make a contribution. Do you think that's enough? Liu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes, it's more than enough. But I still have a question. Before Bai Ti came to Hazuo, even if the 3 pure ones were fully prepared, they couldn't have guessed that there was such a thing in Hazuo's heart. They couldn't have prepared in advance. So, where did you learn this method of breaking the seal that is beyond your Jindan's ability? Don't tell me that you're so smart that you figured it out by yourself. If you have this ability, you do more harm to Xianyuan by staying in the upper realm of the 5th ring than by doing this kind of thing. Chapter 540. At this point, Turquoise Taoist couldn't hold himself back anymore. When a man is about to die, he always needs to talk more. Because when he goes to hell, no one will listen to his bullsh *T again. He has done so much, but he can't show it in front of others. This is a great torture, and there is no sense of accomplishment. But he doesn't want to tell the whole story. He wants this Xianyuan swordsman to be a half-confused ghost. This is the biggest punishment he can give to the swordsman, because he knows that he may not be able to defeat this man. However, the 3 pure ones have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and they're not just good at fighting. So he pretends to be mysterious. Poisonous turtles appear and disappear, but there must be herbs within 7 steps. This is the way of balance between heaven and earth. If there is a strange turtle on a star, it will eventually be free, even if there is no external influence. The appearance of the big turtle is natural, and it is only a matter of time. You Xianyuan are mining on this star, so you have to come early. If no one pays attention to this star, your appearance will be delayed indefinitely. This is also karma. Since karma is established, there must be a coincidence to help it. You are right. Before I came to Hazuo, the 3 pure ones didn't prepare for this. It happened in a hurry, and I didn't have enough time to learn systematically. But it doesn't mean that I don't have my own opportunities in Hajuo. The big turtle is bound to appear, and opportunities are unpredictable. If it's not me, it's others. Who can stop it? His words are mysterious. In fact, what he means is that he has an opportunity here. The loss of Xianyuan is the will of heaven. The reason is that Xianyuan destroyed the original ecological environment here. As for whether the opportunity is an object or a person is another thing. But according to Lu Xiaoyi's judgment, it is more likely that it is a person than in a low-level world of cultivation like Hajuo, who has the ability to teach a disciple from the top Dharma branch with the longest history in the fifth ring. But Lu Xiaoyi knows that he can't ask anymore. He just looks at the slow turtle in the bamboo shoots. This thing is so slow. How long will it take to crawl? Turquoise Taoist explains patiently. You swordsmen are ignorant and incompetent. If he had the time, he should practice less swordsmanship and read more books. That way, he would be able to resolve his anger and become a true cultivator. What you saw was only the image of the turtle in the bamboo shoot stone, but not necessarily its real location and speed. I opened this passage 10 days ago, and now I've already traveled more than half the distance. I'm afraid we don't have much time left. If you have any last words, write them down. The two of them talked about life and death as if they were friends. They didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. They were both people who understood karma very well. The target of their hatred wasn't each other, but something that they couldn't get rid of. Will killing you affect my escape from the blue bamboo shoots? Lu Xiaoyi was still in his swordsman mode. Billy shrugged. You'll have to ask it, not me. Speaking of which, when will you swordsmen stop thinking about solving problems through killing? Lu Xiaoyi said regretfully, it's hard to change. It's just like how you three pure ones can't change your habit of using schemes and tricks to achieve your goals. Billy didn't agree with him. That's wisdom. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Wisdom can make people feel superior for a long time, but martial arts can only achieve temporary gratification. I'm a boar, I can't see too far ahead, so I can only focus on the present. So I'm sorry. I can't be sure when I'll attack you to vent my frustrations. You have to know being killed by that old turtle is different from being killed by my sword. Billy nodded. I'm also a swordsman, I can understand. Do as you wish. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're no longer a swordsman. Do you know why the glory of the cloud-top sword palace is gone, and why even the sword vein doesn't want to acknowledge you? It's because you've learned too much about Dharma veins. You're no longer pure. You're just Dharma cultivators with flying swords. Billy was silent for a moment. I agree with you. The problem is, do we have a choice? The atmosphere became awkward. After a long while, Lu Xiaoyi seemed to react. Cutting off the conditions for the formation of the receiver crystal is a good idea. You've been preparing for this for many years. I'm new here, so it's hard for me to stop it. You could have ended all this years ago, but you chose to wait for me. This is Taoist. Billy nodded. Yes, I waited for you to come because I wanted you to take the blame for this on your head, Xianyuan. Not me, the imposter, but the real Xianyuan swordsman. Hatred needs a target, but my plan wasn't perfect. Because of the threat of the heavenly tribulation, I had already given up on waiting for Xianyuan to come. But you came at the worst time. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was a failure. I don't even know why I'm here. What an ingenious plan. But what will those native cultivators do? They can't keep fighting. They'll come back here eventually. Taoist. Billy explained, yes. They'll definitely come here and soon. If you kill me, they'll see you here. If you don't, I'll explain to them where you and I come from. They're not stupid. The two of them stood by the bamboo shoot rock and watched the big turtle climb up. Although it was not fast, it never stopped. Lu Xiaoyi could not find a way to stop it from what he had learned. It was beyond his ability. Time passed slowly. Strangely, no one came in. This was very unusual. No matter who won, they shouldn't ignore this place, because this place was the foundation of the future of the Hasa star. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I admit that your plan is very thorough, but it seems that something unexpected has happened. Billy didn't hide his confusion. It shouldn't be. This is related to the foundation of their future communication with the fifth ring. They can't let outsiders like us do whatever we want here. 2 more days passed, and still no one came. They were all confined to the bamboo shoots, so they couldn't go out to inquire about the news. Lu Xiaoyi joked, "You've been here for so many years. Haven't you trained any trusted subordinates?" Billy said disdainfully, "Being alone is the best protection. If I trained any trusted subordinates, I'm afraid they wouldn't be alive now." Lu Xiaoyi felt that this task was very awkward. He felt that he had strength, but couldn't use it. He had been reflecting on what he had done wrong. He realized that his mistake was that he didn't take full advantage of his strength in fighting. He used the so-called rude swordsman's way to solve the problem. Instead, he believed in his own scheming ability. In fact, a cultivator's problem-solving ability was a comprehensive ability, strength, and wisdom. He was good at fighting, but he couldn't figure out his opponent's fighting heart. This was because he didn't understand his own strengths and weaknesses. Compared with the experience of those old Dan who had lived for hundreds of years, he was still too inexperienced, so he was restrained in every aspect. This was a lesson for him. He still had so many things to learn after he got out of the shelter of the sect. Billy exclaimed, "How? How is this possible?" Chapter 541. In Lu Xiaoyi's impression, Turquoise Taoist was a tough and forbearing Taoist. He was thoughtful and purposeful. After so many days of being together, Lu Xiaoyi had never seen Turquoise Taoist lose his composure. Although the two of them were at loggerheads with the ultimate goal of killing each other, they showed the demeanor of a cultivator in the process. Bai Hui wanted to enjoy the pleasure of his plan, while Lu Xiaoyi wanted to know as much as possible about the truth of the matter. Seeing Turquoise Taoist concentrating on the blue bamboo shoots, Qin Haodong said with a smile, "Why are you panicking? Did the old turtle become a beauty? Come and see for yourself." Turquoise Taoist didn't even raise his head. Lu Xiaoyi saw that Turquoise Taoist didn't seem to be acting, so he also sent his spiritual mind to the blue bamboo shoots. He found something. Because of the material of the bamboo shoots, Jindan cultivators like them could only detect a limited distance. This was also the reason why he could distinguish the appearance of the old turtle, but he couldn't determine its rising speed and distance. But now, after the limitation of the spiritual mind and a certain limit, many things in the blue bamboo shoots became clear. It was no longer a vague, big turtle. To be more precise, it was not a living creature, but an external form of a mass of energy. The old turtle was just an appearance. Below it, endless spiritual vigor was slowly rising, just like a reservoir under a flood. The water level was rising and reaching the warning line. Of course, there was no dam here, but the blue bamboo shoots had an end. When the spiritual vigor energy was forced out, it might mean that there would be amazing changes on the Hasa star. In this regard, Turquoise obviously knew more. The 3 pure ones had rich knowledge in this regard, so Turquoise Taoist could guess the truth as soon as he saw this situation. This is not a strange beast at the Earth's core. This is the essence of the spiritual vigor of the Hasa star. As long as they rush out, this place will at least become a medium cultivation star, and the spiritual vigor will make up for the rules of nature here. Here, there will be immortals and immortals. The potential of the Hasa star has been released by me. Lu Xiaoyi said directly, "You have been fooled." Turquoise raised his head and said with self-mockery, "Yes, I've been fooled by the Aborigines. They don't want to negotiate with you, Xin Yuan. They just want to upgrade their own cultivation world. I was wondering why no one came here. You know that once we start, we can't stop." Lu Xiaoyi added, "Also, they didn't fight at all. The sword vein was in cahoots. Their goal was to use us as the driving force behind the release of the spiritium. This way, they could avoid my, Xuan Yuan's, investigation. Forgive me for being blunt, but I'm afraid they've already seen through your identity." Billy retorted, "Aren't you the same? How daring of them. If a lower realm offends a higher realm, aren't they afraid of being purged? However, this does not conflict with my goal. Hee hee, Xin Yuan is in trouble. Lu Xiaoyi was about to retort when he suddenly stopped and stared at the end of the main tunnel. All right, here comes the peach picker. Daoist Emerald Hoof also noticed the movement in the tunnel. In their line of sight, dozens of whirling golden core cultivators appeared in their line of sight. Xunjiang, Immortal Elder Yun, Yugong, Jufeng, and the other cultivators led by dozens of cultivators with firm expressions and resolute eyes, walked forward step by step. This was almost half of the Jin Dan elites of Planet Hassa. Today was a historical moment for Planet Hassa. It was the greatest honor in their lives that they could be here, because what they did would benefit thousands of generations of Planet Hassa. They puffed out their chests proudly and rejoiced for the upcoming upheaval. It meant that the whirling star would no longer be controlled by others. No matter where you came from, whether you were from the upper world or the middle world, malicious or kind, they would hold their own destiny tightly in their hands. They would no longer be ordered around by others. For this, they had prepared for nearly 100 years. For this purpose, the Sword Vein and the Dharma Vein resolutely abandoned the thousands of years of separation and grudges. They were tightly united and cooperated with each other for the sake of their own home planet. It was better to live in one's own home. How could it be more meaningful to be sent out of their home planet to the upper realm than to work hard in their own home planet? Thousands of years later, their names would be engraved in the history of Planet Hassa, and they would become the great pioneers of Planet Hassa again. This was human beings. They would never bow and bend their knees. If they bent their backs for a moment, it must be for a moment to straighten their backs in the future. In front of them, the two elite disciples from the upper realm's fifth ring had become the antagonist, the clown. I'm being despised, Turquoise murmured. Although he had achieved his goal, the process made him very uncomfortable. What the three pure ones want to do, they wanted to do it themselves, not be played in the palm of others' hands. Am I not on the side of justice? Where did this come from? Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was very embarrassed. He tried his best to integrate into this world, learn the language, familiarize himself with the geography, open a shop, and listen to others. Was it all to watch children play in the mud under the gaze of others? The cultivators of Planet Hassa came to the space, but they did not approach. Instead, they stood a few hundred feet away from the blue bamboo shoots. Obviously, they had their own understanding of the magic of the blue bamboo shoots. All of this was actually premeditated. If they were far away, they would not have to worry about someone doing something desperate. Why bother? Anyway, in the upsurge of spiritual vigor, all the cultivators trapped in the light circle of the blue bamboo shoots would be decomposed and evaporated into spiritual vigor particles to feed back to this world. They did not want to be stained with the blood of the upper realm cultivators. Turquoise was very unhappy. Now that you are here, waiting for the upsurge of spiritual vigor, have you not thought about the future? Do you know which orthodoxy in the upper realm you have offended? Seeing that everyone was silent, Turquoise began his performance. For the first time in his life, he began to praise the three pure one's sworn enemy. They're the Xinyuan sword sect. It is the most bloodthirsty, ruthless, and barbaric orthodoxy known in the universe. Their cultivation is not for longevity, but for conquest, killing, destruction, madness, and unscrupulous. Taoist Jufeng, who was among the Hassa cultivators, chuckled. But you are not a Xinyuan swordsman. Am I wrong? You are also an enemy of Xinyuan. If you can do it, why can't we? Besides, we did not do all of this. It was the result of your upper realm's coaxing. We were just passively waiting. Cause and effect belong to the upper realm. As for the result, we Hassa people will kindly accept it. Turquoise's usual demeanor was now gone. He also wondered what was wrong with his current state of mind. He had clearly done it in Dafa, but he was extremely uncomfortable with the process. He hated being looked down upon, hated being manipulated, and hated that his decades of hard work were like a farce. The reason he completed the task was only because of a little luck, not his own wisdom. This was unacceptable to him. He had dedicated his most precious youth to this place, but in the end, he discovered that if he was lucky, Even if he left the dog here, he could still complete the task. Chapter 542. However, he couldn't refute anything. His so-called adventure and the way to crack the blue bamboo shoots were deliberately set up by the indigenous people and leaked to him. The impersonation of Xuanyuan's messenger went smoothly because of their close cooperation. Even when he secretly sneaked into the crystal mine for more than 10 years, he was also under their surveillance. The entire Hasa planet was putting on a show to cooperate with him, the clown. The Xuanyuan swordsman had only been a fool for less than 2 years, but he had been a fool for decades. Lu Xiaoyi was still calm. Is this the will of the entire Hasa planet, or is it part of it? Strangely enough, the whirling cultivators did not care about Baihui's harsh words, but they had a deep fear of this real Xuanyuan emissary, who spoke softly and slowly. Immortal Being Cloud was very cautious. In the beginning, it was the idea of us leaders and also our arrangement. But now that the secret has been made public, it is the will of all the Hasa cultivators. We have the right to build our own hometown. We have the right to cultivate to the upper realm. We also have the right to decide the direction of our own astral resources. We have the right to decide whether to sell or not. To whom? At what price? We are equals, not some lower realm from the upper realm. All the Hasa cultivators puffed out their chests. Obviously, this was their inner voice. They didn't want to continue thousands of years of subservience and sacrifice. There were 2 reasons for their change. Firstly, it was the deep-rooted idea of pursuing independence. Secondly, in the past 100 years, there had been people who had explained to them what the so-called true upper realm was, the methods of the upper realm, the bottom line, and the rules and order of the universe. They understood how to achieve their own goals under the premise of avoiding the revenge of the upper realm. Taoist Baihu's role in this was not as dispensable as he thought. In fact, if another cultivator tampered with the blue bamboo shoots, including Lu Xiaoyi, it would be impossible to do it as perfectly as he did. Because of the profound theoretical knowledge of the 3 Pure Ones cultivators, he played a decisive role in it. This was the trend of nature. When the trend was specific to human beings, it looked more like countless coincidences mixed together. It was accidental, but also inevitable. Senior Brother Yutan, who killed it? Immortal Being Cloud said firmly. It was our collective agreement. You don't have to ask about the specific person. If you really want to know, then just think that we worked together to do it. Because he refused to give Hasa's star a future, refused to cooperate. He treats us like slaves, lowly people. Lu Xiaoyi did not comment, and looked at Swordmaster Qinjiang, who had been silent the whole time. What about you? Do you have anything to say? Qinjiang took a deep breath. Our sword vein art came from Xuanyuan. This is an indisputable fact. But this doesn't mean that we and our descendants have to sell everything we have to Xuanyuan. We have been selling for thousands of years. If the art had a price, the value of the receiver crystal would have been more than enough. If skills were priceless, then this universe would not be divided into so many realms, forces, and orthodoxies. Xuanyuan could not use a single favor to exchange for everything of others. Not only this generation, but the next generation as well. None of their descendants could escape from this. Nothing can be exchanged for our freedom and our dreams. I killed Yutan. I have no grudge against him, but he blocked the path of all the cultivators of Hasa's star. So he deserved to die? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There was no need to ask anymore. This was an unsolvable dispute, because you could never think from the other party's point of view. This was also the common problem of almost all the thorny problems in the cultivation world. The mysterious blue bamboo shoot stone was found in the receiver crystal mine of the Sword Stance Mountain. So the wind blew and the clouds moved. Was it the sword vein that contacted the Dharma vein? Or was it the Dharma vein that actively approached the sword vein? These were no longer important. What was important was that they all had an upward heart and a belief to contribute to the mother planet. The power of the natives alone could not solve this problem. First, there were technical reasons. The ceiling was Jean Dan's realm. How could their knowledge be compared to the upper realm that had no ceiling? In the fifth ring, the major forces had not only real half-immortals, but also real immortals. Their vision and knowledge were not comparable to those of Hasistar. Moreover, they had to consider how to face the wrath of Xianyuan from the upper realm after solving this problem by themselves. Therefore, they began to stir up trouble, starting from killing Yutan. They wanted to let the upper realm realize the changes here, and then wait for the opportunity to profit from the chaos. There was still a missing thread, a mysterious thread that would string everything together. However, Lu Xiaoyi already had his own judgment, so he did not waste his breath on these people. He turned around and walked to the blue bamboo shoot, because the old turtle that was transformed by spiritual vigor was not far from the ground. The part of the blue bamboo shoot that was exposed to the ground had begun to change. It was colorful and dense. That was the strange appearance of the huge and pure 5 elements spiritual vigor through the blue bamboo shoot. At this time, even the most stupid cultivator understood what it meant. When the colorful flow reached the extreme and the old turtle in the blue bamboo shoot jumped out of the bamboo shoot stone, it was the moment when the spiritual vigor of Hasistar was reborn. Pointing at the old turtle on the blue bamboo shoot and the spiritual vigor that was becoming more and more obvious, Lu Xiaoyi looked at the crowd. There is a truth that you must understand. In this world of cultivation, except for time, everything else can be stopped. Just like the spiritual vigor here, since it can come up, it can also go down. As he spoke, the interception group in his mind turned and cut off the connection between the bamboo shoot stone and the outside world, cutting off a mysterious guidance. His voice was soft but unquestionable. Stop. Now is not the time for you to come up. He spoke to the big turtle in public. Everyone, including Beatty, thought that he was a fool. Was he driven crazy by anger? What was the big turtle? It was the essence of the spiritual vigor ocean that had been accumulated in the depths of Hasistar for countless years. It was a psychic existence, something that would turn into the law of the great Tao when it jumped up to the ground. How could such an existence be controlled by the words of a mere Jean Dan? Too naive, too ridiculous. But to everyone's astonishment, after Baihui unlocked the seal, the spiritual power that had been steadily increasing suddenly stopped. Although they could feel the irritation of the spiritual power and the reluctance of the big turtle, the spiritual power had indeed stopped. This was something that even a supreme cultivator might not be able to do. Beatty stammered, How did you do it? Lu Xiaoyi didn't pay any attention to him. Lu Xiaoyi talked to him before because he needed time to reach his goal and communicate with the turtle. Now, he wasn't interested in talking to him. He had killed Xuanyuan's people and wanted to hurt him. There was no room for negotiation. Chapter 543. Looking at everyone's surprise, Lu Xiaoyi remained calm. Maybe it's just an accident. The big turtle is tired. Maybe it wants to take a rest at this moment. Lu Xiaoyi lowered his head and faced the big turtle again. Go down 1,000 feet first. You make everyone very uneasy here. I thought you were going to have a big meal. This time, everyone saw clearly that the big turtle was unwilling to raise its neck to the sky. It was an illusory spiritual body, so it couldn't make a sound. However, what it spat out was an extremely strong storm of spiritual vigor. Although it didn't want to do that, what made people feel desperate was that the big turtle really lowered its butt. Under its suppression, the tremendous spirit vigor began to shrink. It actually shrank back to hundreds of meters before it stopped moving. Now everyone understood that this swordsman from Xianyuan could really control the spiritual vigor of the whirling star. In other words, as long as he was there, the whirling star would never change. Becoming a middle-upper cultivation world would always be a dream. It would only take a moment to go from heaven to hell. The unexpected stimulation made the cultivators of the whirling star begin to show murderous intent in their eyes. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. What? Are you not satisfied? Am I delaying your future? The cultivation world is like this. If you don't fight with your blood, you can't get anything you want. Since you want to fight, I'll give you a chance. I'll let you know what a Xinyuan swordsman is. With a leap, he moved thousands of feet away. At the same time, 7 flying swords spun out and formed a mysterious sword formation in the slightly narrow space. The Big Dipper sword formation. The 500 feet limit mentioned by Billy was meaningless to him. Since he showed his ability to affect the old turtle, people were no longer surprised. The space was instantly in chaos, like a tiger entering a flock of sheep. The 7 flying swords above, Lu Xiaoyi's head-balanced attack and defense. He held a long sword in his hand and killed everyone he saw. For a moment, blood splashed, and people shouted loudly. Those who could come here were all cultivators of the whirling star who didn't care about life and death. Since they had shown their faces in front of the cultivators of the upper realm, there was a possibility that the upper realm might retaliate against them in the future. However, they did not expect that the retaliation would come so quickly. Dozens of people against one, and all of them were at the Jindan realm. In the eyes of ordinary cultivators, there was no way to fight this battle. There was no reason to retreat. However, they had never really come into contact with the top swordsman from the upper realm. They did not know what it meant to be the craziest bandit on that bandit planet. For a moment, the flying swords and spells filled the narrow space. However, with Lu Xiaoyi's ghost-like escape art and the tight defense of the sword formation, they could not cause any harm to him at all. But the sharpness of the sword formation was something they didn't dare to imagine. With Lu Xiaoyi's heavy sword, his strength was outstanding even in the 5th ring. In this place, he could easily defeat anyone with a single slash. The first unlucky one was Bluebeard, who was hiding behind a crowd. Knowing that there was something strange about him, Lu Xiaoyi's first slash was especially heavy. The combined power of the sword formation directly pierced through Bluebeard. It also slightly injured the Jindan behind him. Swordsman was not suitable for such a narrow terrain. The problem was that it was even worse when dozens of Jindan were squeezed together. Once the spells were cast, they would not care about anything else in a moment of desperation, and accidental injuries were everywhere. Lu Xiaoyi's flying swords were very tricky. They specifically targeted those powerhouses who were clear-headed and coordinated. Under his heavy sword, the counterattacks of the Whirling Star cultivators seemed to be disorganized, and each of them acted on their own. It was inevitable that they would be injured and killed one by one. The difference between the upper realm and the lower realm was undoubtedly exposed in a real battle. Although they were all in the middle and late stages of Jindan in terms of cultivation, in terms of skills, system, and killing experience, how could they be a match for the strongest 5th ring elite of the sword sect? Just his unparalleled heavy sword alone was enough to render his opponents helpless. In the flying sword light, one of Chun Zhang's arms was separated from his body. It was instantly smashed into pieces and could not be put back. Immortal Elder Yin only had one leg left. Would he still be able to stand like before? The other powerhouses all had their own casualties, and none of them were whole. When the powerhouses were the first to be wiped out, how could the remaining weak ones react and want to run? In this special environment and situation, not only did the whirling Jindan's advantage in numbers not play a role, but it also became a burden. In a different environment, in the vast sky outside, he would not be able to do this. But here, when his sword formation enveloped everyone, nothing could be changed. Lu Xiaoyi was also injured all over. This was the result of his pursuit of a quick kill. If the battle dragged on for too long, it was inevitable that some of them would escape. This was not something he wanted to see. Lu Xiaoyi's speed was faster, his flying sword was heavier, his idea was more advanced, and he was risking his life more. In such a collision, the result was predictable. In just a short moment, Lu Xiaoyi had made full use of the characteristics of sword cultivators. He was not afraid of fighting in groups. At the same time, he also found the secret door left by the Sword Mountain when it was passed down in the Whirling Star. These swordsmen did not specialize in close combat. They might have practiced it, but it was just a hobby and had not been sublimated into the system. They did not understand the true meaning of close combat for swordsmen. If it was a fifth ring or other sword vein experts, they only needed to send a few people to engage him in close combat, and his combat power would be greatly reduced. He did not show mercy to these cultivators of planet whirling, nor did he kill them indiscriminately. Those who knew their limits would be severely injured. Those who wanted to risk their lives, he directly sent them to the Western Paradise without any hesitation. Since Roly-Poly dared to say that the responsibility of killing would be borne by everyone, they had to accept this result. In the cultivation world, was it so easy to boast? 2 years of grievances were resolved in one day. Since they could not win in strategy, they could only compete with their fists. How could they upgrade the world without paying the price of blood? He no longer had the mentality of a rice worm. He had become a real swordsman. As a swordsman, he had to stand in the swordsman's perspective and look at the problem. He should not be weak and sympathize with others. Otherwise, he would not know his own position, and the unlucky one would be himself in the end. Supreme Fufeng was right. He should just take care of himself and not care about other things. Chen Jiang fell to the ground. His heart was dead. Together with him, there were dozens of heavily injured cultivators of planet whirling who had become fish on the chopping block. He did not understand. How could a perfect plan that was about to succeed fail? However, he finally understood what a swordsman was. Without a doubt, Xian Yuan from the upper realm had never really sent out their elite disciples, which gave him the illusion that a swordsman from the upper realm was only SOSO. That was why he thought that with the protection of the heavenly tribulation, the upper realm might not be able to do anything to them. It was all wrong. If the sword vein from the upper realm got serious, they would be completely wiped out. Who could they blame? Lu Xiaoyi was bathed in blood. He picked out a half-dead person from the crowd. It was Bluebeard. He threw him on the ground and pointed at the despairing, whirling cultivators. Today, I'll set a rule for all of you. If you have any requests, say it. Even if you don't agree at that time, the news will definitely be sent back to Xian Yuan for the sect to decide. You have to let everyone live. However, the way you kill people will only bring disaster to you. There's nothing wrong with restoring the realm's spiritual opportunity. However, if Xian Yuan doesn't give you something that belongs to Xian Yuan, you can't take it. Chapter 544. Lu Xiaoyi turns around and stares at the unnatural Baihoof. What do you think about what happened between us? Baihoof looks up to the sky and laughs. What an ignorant man. No matter how domineering Xian Yuan is, when have you ever seen the 3 pure ones bow to you? It's just a battle to the death. It's not worth mentioning. Lu Xiaoyi can't help sneering at his bold words. Battle? You think too highly of yourself. He suddenly puts his hand on the hilt of his sword and shouts. Baihoof on the opposite side is nervous. Who can be calm when facing such a fierce man? He is just pretending to be arrogant to calm down. Lu Xiaoyi's posture makes him instinctively respond to Baihoof's aura instinctively. His own aura also reaches the peak in an instant. This is the instinct of a cultivator, but he forgets there is a loud explosion above and thunder falls. Under the punishment of heaven, Baihoof Taoist is burned into charcoal. His face is full of unwillingness, like a statue. Cultivators of the planet Hasa are scared out of their wits. This man treats human life as nothing. If all the people of Xian Yuan are such swordsmen, what is the future of the planet Hasa? Lu Xiaoyi grabs Bluebeard with one hand and shouts in a low voice, Beard, you and I know each other. I can spare your life if you tell me the truth. I won't ask you too many secrets. What is your bounded domain? Bluebeard raises his head with difficulty. Bluebeard, a casual cultivator, a native of the planet Hasa. Lu Xiaoyi feels the strange movement in his mind, but he doesn't expect that such a person is a man of sacrifice. He can't get anything out of him. He exerts force on his hand and shatters Bluebeard's heart meridian. At the same time, the intercepted luck in his mind turns and absorbs Bluebeard's luck. This luck is combined with the intercepted luck in his mind. It is very strange. Lu Xiaoyi finds that there seems to be an old man with a white beard smiling at him, an AI. It is a familiar smile. When he was forming essence, he had a premonition that he was involved in some extraordinary circle, but he didn't have time to think about these changes. There were too many things left for him to deal with. The first thing Lu Xiaoyi had to consider was how to clean up the mess here. He had already fought and killed them. He couldn't just leave them here like this. The cultivators of Planet Hassa would stay away from him, but they would never be willing to submit to him and be his subordinate. Humans had never been a race that would be oppressed by others. As soon as he arrived at the blue bamboo shoots, he roughly guessed what it was. In the tunnel, his cloud-severing orb had sensed something, but at that time, he could not understand why. Once he came into contact with the blue bamboo shoots, he finally understood. Back then, when he was a lonely soul drifting in the universe, he encountered the great collapse of the fragments of fate, and the places where they fell were not limited to living beings. It also included nature. For example, the huge spiritual vigor stored deep in the Earth's core of planet Hassa fell a very strong fragment of luck. After tens of thousands of years of fusion, it merged with the spiritual vigor and formed the illusionary form of the old turtle. It had the most superficial self-awareness and the consciousness of the great Tao, so it began to get rid of the confinement in the Earth's core and take the initiative to spread to the human world. If it was just this self-awareness, it would take at least hundreds of thousands of years, or even longer, to form a path to pursue self-awareness. However, if someone was leading the way, this process would be greatly accelerated. The person leading the way was the mysterious Bluebeard. Bluebeard also had luck. In the beginning, Lu Xiaoyi did not notice it. In fact, as his cultivation level increased, he realized that the cultivators with strong providence he met now would always have a way to conceal themselves. They all had their own tricks, just like his sword spirit's concealment. But what made Bluebeard different was that he seemed to belong to a certain force or an organization in a certain world. He acted with a plan and a purpose. Unlike Lu Xiaoyi, who acted purely on instinct, he must have a purpose. Although Lu Xiaoyi couldn't be sure what his purpose was, this person came from the same place as the person he had never met before who had seized his destiny when he was forming his gold core. Because of these two seizing of destiny, he had faintly seen an old man's smiling face in the unseen world, and that smile had made his hair stand on end. He killed Bluebeard decisively. First, he was not interested in spiritual spying. Second, he really didn't want to get involved in a cosmic conspiracy at the level of the star area. His small shoulders were too small to bear such a big pressure. What was certain was that these two people both came from a force that could use the luck in the sea of consciousness of cultivators to some extent. It was hard to say how much they used it, but it shouldn't be too strong. Because he, a worm in the universe, had ruined their plans twice, which made his heart beat fast. He had no choice. If he didn't do this, he couldn't solve the current problem. What was Bluebeard's purpose? Was it purely to make trouble for the Fifth Ring sect or Xianyuan? Or was it really for the recovery of the spiritual vigor on planet Hassa to benefit mankind? Or was it not for the spiritual vigor, but to take away the luck that belonged to nature? He didn't know, but the problem he was facing now couldn't be avoided. The cultivators on planet Hassa were temporarily disabled, the threat from the three pure ones was removed, and the mysterious Bluebeard was dead. So, how should he deal with this luck? Including the huge amount of spiritual vigor under the command of the luck. Normally, from Xuanyuan's perspective, from the perspective of the outer Sorochinchio peak, he should suppress this majestic spiritual vigor. He had this ability because he could affect the old turtle, who was the incarnation of luck. He learned this ability secretly from Bluebeard, because Bluebeard had been communicating with the old turtle in some mysterious way. Lu Xiaoyi was just hiding on the side and secretly learning from him. While doing so, he also took advantage of his interception luck. His ability to intercept luck was far stronger than Bluebeard's. He couldn't remember how many people's luck he had taken away. However, it could also be said that Bluebeard's method of using luck was rather crude and far from reaching the level of subtlety. The premise of its use was that for the vast majority of cultivators, The mysteries of luck were unknown. This was a benefit that belonged to a certain group of people. He didn't quarrel with Beatty for a few days because he had nothing to do. He just met Beatty's long-suppressed desire to express himself to achieve the purpose of completely controlling the big turtle's consciousness. Now, the overall situation outside was temporarily settled. How should he deal with the spiritual vigor in the old turtle? For Xianyuan, for stability, for continuous resources of receiver crystals, he should suppress the big turtle and the spiritual vigor. Only by maintaining the status quo could he protect the interests of Xianyuan to the greatest extent. This was for the public. If it was for personal reasons, he should swallow this ownerless luck. He had a hunch that in the future, he would inevitably have to deal with the force behind Bluebeard. The only way he could think of to protect himself was not swordsmanship, but the powerful interception team. Was there a third way? Chapter 545. He chose the third option. The cultivators of planet Hasa looked at the swordsman in despair. With him around, no one in the entire star sector could stop him. The point was, if they missed this opportunity, they did not know when the next one would be. They didn't understand Beatty's technique. They didn't know Bluebeard's role in it. For a spiritual vigor creature like this, after failing once, they didn't know how long it would stay dormant. Even thousands of years were considered short. They wouldn't be as close to success as they were this time. Moreover, as long as the Xianyuan cultivators were around, they would never have a chance to make a move. This time, they could still plot secretly. Now that the secret was out in the open, this place would definitely be heavily guarded by the upper realm. This was the cruelty of the cultivation world. What could they do if they were not as good as others? The swordsman from the upper realm was right about one thing. How could change, especially a drastic change, not pay the price of blood? If they had realized this earlier, they would have surrounded and suppressed him openly in the open space outside and fully utilized their advantage in numbers. Even though they might not have won, they would not have fallen to this state where they did not even have the qualifications to negotiate. How could there be such a logic in the cultivation world to always think of peaceful changes? This was a competition between a rising force and a vested interest. There was no room for coexistence or compromise. One wrong step would lead to many wrong steps. They would lose the future of planet Hasa. They watched as the swordsman dealt with his opponent from the upper realm and inexplicably killed the most famous rogue cultivator, Bluebeard. He stood next to the blue bamboo shoots with a cold face, controlling life and death, taking as he pleased. When the door was opened and they really came into contact with the outside world, they finally understood what the swordsman was. A swordsman was lying on the ground. He could not get up, but it did not stop him from screaming from the bottom of his heart. No, no. A flash of sword light flashed past like lightning, once again cruelly nailing him to the ground, making his already heavy injuries even worse. However, this still could not stop the other cultivators from shouting. Unsurprisingly, every cultivator who shouted was given an extra flying sword until no one dared to make a sound. They finally understood what kind of existence this so-called swordsman orthodoxy in the upper realm was. They were cold, cruel, bloodthirsty, and had no sympathy at all. They could only watch him give the order to the big turtle and wait for the spiritual opportunity to leave. Waiting for hope to be extinguished. This was the darkest moment of a star. But what happened next made them unable to believe their eyes. Originally, the spiritium that had already fallen 1,000 feet didn't continue to fall. Instead, it began to slowly rise. What followed was the cold voice of the swordsman. Xianyuan, in the tens of thousands of years since the establishment of the sect, the biggest rule is to follow the rules, restoring the spiritual vigor of the celestial bodies, benefiting mankind for generations to come, and leading the prosperity of the cultivation world has always been Xuanyuan's unchanging principle. If Beatty was still here, he would definitely scold him for being a hypocrite and spouting nonsense. But now, no one could stop him from flaunting himself. Prospering the whirling cultivation ecosystem. This wish is not wrong. But your mistake is to use improper methods. Things that could have been negotiated, yet he wanted to achieve his goal by killing people. Xuanyuan's blood is not so easy to be stained with. We accept any constructive opinions and are willing to develop together under the premise of friendly cooperation. But Xuanyuan does not accept threats. He does not accept threats. He does not accept conspiracies and tricks. Remember this, it will be beneficial for the survival of the whirling planet. This is the first time, and I don't want to see it a second time. Xuanyuan's forgiveness is only one time. Cherish it. In just a few moments, the cultivators of the whirling planet experienced the torture of ice and fire. No one knew what everyone was thinking, but the memory of today would accompany them for the rest of their lives and would never be forgotten. Using killing to establish their prestige, using righteousness to establish their virtue, at this moment, everyone, including Shunjiang, Immortal Wang Yu, Gongju Feng, had to lower their proud heads. If the cultivators of other orthodoxies chose to do this, they would definitely establish their virtue first, and then convert everyone. They wouldn't need to be stained with blood. But Xuanyuan's people were the opposite. They could have raised the spiritual opportunity first and gained the gratitude and support of the cultivators of the whirling planet. But they chose to kill without telling anyone. Was this the swordsman? Not exactly, because Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about the bad habits of human beings. They were afraid of the strong and cruel, and they were ungrateful. After Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be the turtle, he focused on the big turtle. After stealing Bluebeard's fortune and fusing with it, he had a rough idea of Bluebeard's ultimate goal. Maybe he wanted to mess things up, but his main goal was still the fortune in the sea of consciousness, which was much stronger than the fortune in the sea of consciousness of human beings. This was what Bluebeard and the force behind him really wanted to steal. They almost succeeded, but they met Lu Xiaoyi. Or it could be said that now, Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of it. Once the mass of fate in the shape of the big turtle merged with the sky, it would form the principle of Tao, which belonged to the whirling planet and could no longer be obtained. Not only the fate, but also the Tao realm about the 5 elements, yin, yang, chaos, and so on, which have been formed by the spiritual opportunity of the Earth's core for hundreds of thousands of years. It was now a real treasure, an incomparably precious treasure for any cultivator. The point was that the big turtle transformed from the precious Tao realm didn't reject him. It even seemed to take the initiative to join him. He had to admit that the force behind Bluebeard was really amazing. There were countless cultivation realms and orthodoxies, each with their own specialties and characteristics. Obviously, in terms of fate, the orthodoxies behind Bluebeard were stronger than the 5th ring cultivators. Should he get it? In the exchange of fate with the big turtle, Lu Xiaoyi clearly expressed his thoughts. The bridge should go its own way, and the road should go its own way. Living beings had luck, and so should nature. It was hard to imagine that in a world, only creatures like humans had fate, but nature, which nurtured creatures, had no fate. That was not real fate. Real fate should be shared, not only between human beings, but also between human beings and nature. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi finally understood the true meaning of fate. The big turtle finally leaped out of the bamboo shoots. It happily hugged and touched Lu Xiaoyi, passing by him. It didn't leave any power of fate for this human being, but Lu Xiaoyi found that his mass of fate started to have its own color. It was no longer the lifeless grayish black and white. Instead, it had become brightly colored. Although it was still blurry, it was a fundamental change. It was the color that nature had given him. From now on, his fate had an inexplicable connection with the universe, and it would become closer and closer with the progress of his cultivation base and his view of the universe. Until one day, he would be nature, and nature would be him. Coexisting with nature, that was the path, wasn't it? So, would it be more beneficial to selfishly intercept the big turtle's fate? Or would it be more beneficial to choose now? The 5 elements, yin, yang, chaos, and other Tao realms would improve along with his improvement. But without the colors given by nature, where could he find such a chance? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. As expected, it was good to pretend to be weak sometimes. If he didn't pretend to be weak, he would be struck by lightning. Chapter 546. The figure of the big turtle flew higher and higher and became fainter and fainter. Finally, it melted into the sky. Then endless spiritual opportunity flooded the entire Hasa star. This will be a long process. It will take at least 1,000 years to determine what kind of balance will be reached in the end. Will it become a middle-level or a high-level world of cultivation? The cultivators of the Hasa star all burst into tears. They fought, and sacrificed for this world. After their hopes were shattered, they regained their hope. Now, what was done could not be changed. The person in front of them had a very complicated feeling in their hearts. Was it hatred or gratitude? They couldn't tell. In such a trance, the indifferent voice sounded again. The initiator of this incident will still face the trial of Xianyuan. Xianyuan still has the mining rights of the Hasa star, until the receiver, crystal mine, withers. As for the specific rules, the next envoy Xianyuan will discuss them with you in detail. My request is that I want to see 70% of the receiver crystals in your warehouse within a month. Send it here. I hope this is an open and honest deal. I don't have the hobby of checking other people's warehouses. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at them calmly. All the cultivators of the Hasa star lowered their heads. No one objected. Lu Xiaoyi floated to the main tunnel and gradually disappeared. He left only one sentence, which made all the cultivators of the Hasa star nervous. The spiritual opportunity has increased. The rules of the Tao of Heaven are complete. So, the heaven's retribution will not stop at Jindan. Maybe it's Yuanying, maybe it's immortal. What needs to be considered is, when a powerful cultivator comes, are you ready? This sentence really pointed to the core, showing the cruelty of the world of cultivation. After upgrading the world and opening the window to the universe, in addition to the foreseeable future, you must first be prepared to welcome the arrival of monsters. Was it so easy to live in a high-level world? If they really met the interstellar bandits of Zhuozhou, the world would be occupied by them. After thousands of years, where would the Hasa star be? Several leading cultivators struggled to gather together. Cultivators' bodies were tough. As long as they didn't die at that time, they could always recover slowly. The realm of Jindan was already the backbone of the world of cultivation, and its recovery ability could not be underestimated. They needed to take this opportunity to come up with a plan when everyone was gathered together. There wasn't much time, only 7 or 8 years. And just like what the swordsman said, this time the Xianyuan mining raft wouldn't just take a detour in the sky and leave after receiving goods. There was a possibility that it would be heavily repaired. If they didn't make preparations now, could it be that there would be another bloody storm after the major repairs? Mr. Yu sighed and said, "Before the whirling cultivators grow up, we need a backer who can protect us on the cosmic level." How long would this take? She was not the first Yuanying, the first true monarch. Instead, the various orthodoxies had to form a complete chain of systems, forming a pyramid-like cultivation system. Only then could there be an endless stream of high-level cultivators. Not just a flash in the pan, just like our Qi Eater Foundation establishment and Jindan chains. Immortal being above the clouds was also very melancholic. They had achieved their goal, but they discovered that this was only the beginning of another difficult period. 3,000 years. It would take at least 3,000 years for us to reach the level of mature Yuanying. There are too many things to consider, such as skills, resources, talents, and experience, and we need to explore them all from scratch. As for the level of true monarch, it's not realistic to think about it now. Therefore, to live completely independently in this universe without being controlled by others, and to be able to make their own voices, it would take at least 10,000 years. What should we do in the next 10,000 years? Without the protection of the heaven's doom, the whirling star would be defenseless. Zhu Feng spoke bluntly. Why do you have to be so secretive and shy? Except for the Xianyuan in the upper world, do we have any other choice? Even a spare one would be good? Do we? Since we don't, and Xianyuan is powerful, we should all call him father. If a father beats his son, is that revenge? It's a lesson. His words made everyone feel very embarrassed. They had just been beaten up, and now they had to turn around and ask for help. Not to mention cultivators. Even mortals with a little courage would not do that. However, they had no other choice. When Zhu Feng said it, it broke the last layer of window paper and also the last dignity of cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi was finally free. He was experiencing the subtleties of the growth of spiritual vigor in this new flourishing world. To him, the growth of his cultivation was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the changes in the 5 elements. The beginning of his cultivation of the 5 elements was the sword pagoda made by immortal Rue. After 15 years, he could be considered to have some small achievements. The so-called small achievements were only in the 2 elements of water and fire. He had not learned the other 3 elements yet. His speed of comprehension could only be said to be ordinary. He did not show any special talent in the 5 elements, but he was not a blockhead either. The 5 elements, including yin and yang, were the cornerstones for cultivators to reach the upper world. How high a cultivator could go depended on how hard his foundation was. But here on the Whirling Star, he found that he was a little enlightened. His understanding of the mechanism of the 5 elements of all things became sharper. What else could it be? He had been reborn after a trip to the Whirling Star? Except for the colorful interception of luck in the sea of consciousness, there was no other explanation. Of course, there was also another reason. The spiritual opportunity of the Whirling Star had just been released, and the rules of the Great Tao had been upgraded. The 5 elements of heaven and earth were in a subtle stage of change. It was this subtle natural change that could make people more able to track the changes. When there were ripples in the stagnant water, it was very difficult to find the regularity in it because everything was hidden under the surface of the water. With the ability of gold core cultivators, they could not exert the power of the 5 elements, but now everything was out of nature. The evolution of nature, the rules of nature, had naturally manifested the true essence of the 5 elements with the changes in the world. This was an opportunity. The opportunities given by the Tao of nature were everywhere. It was not necessary to fall into a cave and meet a corpse. After kowtowing a few times, there was a big hole in the ground, and there was a secret book of magic power in it. It was also not necessary to find some kind of natural treasure in exploration and eat it. After eating it, one's power would be greatly improved, and one's mind would be sharper. Originally, one could not understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but after eating it, one could immediately understand calculus, just like the spiritual opportunity of the Whirling Star this time. If one did not jump for joy and blindly absorb the spiritual opportunity, but thought more about the things behind this change of the world, one would definitely have a unique harvest. The Tao of nature had upgraded, the 5 elements had changed, and yin and yang had been balanced. The Tao of nature had just shown such an opportunity to all the cultivators of the Whirling Star. As for whether one could do it or not, it was up to one's own luck. The gap between cultivators was also like this until the difference between clouds and mud. Chapter 547. Lu Xiaoyi seized this opportunity and began to spend all his energy and time on the changes of the 5 elements. He knew that such changes would be the most intense and obvious in the first few years. Then they would weaken rapidly and stabilize when they weakened to a certain extent. They would continue for hundreds or thousands of years to subtly influence him. However, by then, such small changes might not be something that a small gene Dan like him would be able to perceive. Therefore, now was not the time to improve his cultivation, nor was it the time to practice his swordsmanship. Now was the best time to comprehend the 5 elements. A cultivator must learn to choose and practice in the most appropriate direction at the most appropriate time. Only then could they achieve twice the results with half the effort. Since he could not swim in the sky, he could only practice flying in the sea to take advantage of the situation. He was practicing under a crooked tree at the top of a small hill at the side of Jinji Mountain. He was all alone and did not build a shelter or a cave. From this position, he could see everything at a glance from the main peak of Jinji Mountain. There were no secrets to speak of. Every day, countless swordsmen would secretly watch from the distant peak, including the Jin Dan swordsman, hoping to learn a move or two from him. To their disappointment, when the swordsman kept his sword, he looked exactly like a cultivator. It was as if his buttocks were smeared with glue. Once he sat down, he did not move at all. Could it be that the swordsman from the upper realm practiced swordsmanship like this? Without drawing his sword, he just waved in his head? No one dared to ask for guidance. The fact that the swordsman from the upper realm found such a hill beside Jinji Mountain clearly showed his attitude. They were all clever people and understood. Only Chun Jiang, the one-armed sword Lord Chun Jiang, remained at the top of Jinji Mountain like the swordsman from the upper realm. Of course, he no longer allowed others to call him Sword Lord. How could he have the face to call himself Sword Lord when he was killed like a dog in the mine? The Sword Vane's funeral arrangements had already been made. He was very clear about his fate. If he came down from the raft, he would either be killed or dragged to the upper bound for punishment. However, it did not matter to him anymore. He had already taken everything lightly, except for the burning desire to pursue swordsmanship in his heart. There were too many things he didn't understand. Why was the other person's sword so heavy? It was so heavy that it was unreasonable. It was so heavy that it made people despair. It was so heavy that it felt like he was using a fire stick. He could not be blamed for having such a feeling. To him, Jin Dan was the pinnacle, and he did not have the concept of a sword spirit. This was the lack of a legacy. Xinyuan was not stupid. He had to be selective about the legacy he left behind. It was like a cat teaching a tiger. The powerful ones would be left behind. Chun Jiang is a talented person. He was also a persevering person. He had all the excellent qualities of a swordsman. The only mistake he made was that he was born in the wrong place. He did not choose to regrow his broken arm. Instead, he left this flaw. Was it to remember hatred or to learn a lesson? While he was meditating, he could vaguely feel that the swordsman from the upper bound was practicing something. Although he was not as good as Lu Xiaoyi in terms of swordsmanship, he was much stronger than Lu Xiaoyi in terms of cultivation. It was reasonable for him to notice the inexplicable changes in the 5 elements. During this period, the big and small forces on planet Hasa began to offer their storage crystals to the Sword Rack Mountain. Some of them were of high quality, while some were of lower quality. Anyway, the crystals that were collected by a sect were not that bad. All the sects and forces that were in the space of the mine at that time, as well as those who did not participate but heard about it, as long as they felt that they had a certain level of power, they would obediently offer their treasures. It was not only because of Lu Xiaoyi's abuse of power, but also because of the fact that planet Hasa had leveled up. The door to the world had been opened, and scourges would come one after another. At this time, it would be stupid to care about their small storage. If they really met with unreasonable people, they would not even have a place to cry. This was actually a disguised form of submission and loyalty. Everyone knew that if they offered their treasures, the swordsman might not remember them. However, if they did not offer their treasures, he would definitely remember them. The future of planet Hasa was full of variables, and it would take a long time. Before they really grew up, who knew what they would encounter? In this way, the large storage space brought by Lu Xiaoyi was soon filled up. Luckily, the storage crystal was a kind of finely processed material. Although it was precious, it was not the main material of each sword or magic weapon. Otherwise, the mining raft might not be able to be pulled back in one time. Communication became the most embarrassing thing. Lu Xiaoyi could not contact Xinyuan, and he could not fly out of the air layer. He could only look at the sky and sigh. Time moved especially fast in the violent changes of the 5 elements. When such changes began to show signs of slowing down, 8 years had already passed. Lu Xiaoyi had benefited greatly from this process. In view of the foundation he learned from immortal Rue for 15 years, the combination of fate and nature in the sea of consciousness, and the obvious changes of the 5 elements on planet Hassa, all these factors combined made his progress in the 5 elements a qualitative leap. He succeeded in comprehending all the elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. This was a huge surprise. He thought it would take at least hundreds of years. However, here, on planet Hassa, the changes of the 5 elements complemented each other. It was not like the self-cultivation of cultivators, who did not do it one by one. Instead, it was as a whole, and the changes of the whole were displayed in front of cultivators. There were 5 elements in the sky: water, fire, metal, wood, and earth. They evolved and became everything. They reinforced and counteracted each other, complemented and compensated each other, and circulated naturally. As long as you looked at them as a whole, there was no barrier in a certain line, especially the line of earth, which was very dangerous for cultivators. The difficulty for cultivators to comprehend the 5 elements was that they did not have a suitable environment. They could not understand the regularity of the changes of the 5 elements in nature, because almost every mature world had a stable and restrained mechanism of the 5 elements. It was far less straightforward than planet Hassa when it was just born. In the last year of Lu Xiaoyi's life, he began to practice the escape of the 5 elements. It seemed insignificant and unimportant, but in fact, it provided him with a kind of fighting ability in all kinds of terrains and environments. When he really mastered the escape of the 5 elements, he would not be afraid of water, cave, or deep space. One day he felt something. He looked up at the sky and saw a green bird sword message whistling down. It was a message that Xuanyuan's mining raft had arrived. A senior was contacting him in outer space. He took out the prepared reply letter. It roughly recorded all kinds of changes in planet Hassa in the past 10 years. It also mentioned that the conditions of planet Hassa had changed because of the upgrade of planet Hassa. The green bird letter flew back to outer space. It could only tell the truth, but it could not make decisions for the senior cultivator, whether to go down or not. And whether there was still the danger of planet Hassa, it still needed the senior cultivator's judgment. After a while, there was no reply from the green bird. However, there seemed to be a big hole in the sky. A black floating raft came out and went straight to Jianji Mountain. On Jianji Mountain, countless indigenous cultivators of planet Hassa, including swordsmen and law cultivators, gathered here, waiting for the judgment of fate. They knew very well that for the immortal cultivator from the upper world, it did not matter whether they hid or not. Chapter 548. P.S. Jinren, I just want to pay you back today, but you come again in the middle of the night. I'm scared of you, so I'll pay you back right now. The visitor was still Fufeng, followed by a strange foreign Sword Jean Dan. He was unlucky because of his excellent raft-riding skills. In the end, he became a galactic coachman. When he saw Lu Xiaoyi, the first thing he said was, 2 hours. I can only stay here for 2 hours. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood what the old perfected cultivator meant. After all, the spiritual vigor of the whirling star had not recovered for more than 10 years, so it was still in an unstable state. The rules of the way of heaven had not been fully formed, and they were still trying to find a balance point in the collision. Therefore, the heavenly tribulation could not be completely eliminated. If it was the Yuanying Jinren, it would definitely be better. Therefore, he told the old perfected cultivator everything that happened on the whirling star in detail. Except for the mysterious fate, he did not even hide the fact that he took the initiative to recover the spiritual vigor of the whirling star. He couldn't hide it because there were so many indigenous people watching. Fufeng didn't say anything. He neither praised nor blamed Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi's credit was that he found out the cause of the death of the 2 Jean Dan cultivators in Xianyuan. However, he was responsible for the destruction of the last receiver crystal planet in Xianyuan. Without the spiritual vigor and the big turtle, the receiver crystal would lose its source. With the current storage, it would wither within 1,000 years. The old perfected cultivator scanned the Jinjia mountain, the mine, and the terrified indigenous cultivators. Then, he carefully observed the changes of the spiritual vigor of the whirling star and the replacement of the 5 elements. He knew that what was done could not be undone, and the original situation could never be restored. He came here for 2 purposes. One was to get the minerals, and the other was to exchange people. He didn't want to get involved in other things. However, in this situation, he had to come up with a plan. He couldn't go back to the faction to ask for instructions and spend a few years to come back. He had the right and the qualification to do so. After judging the current situation of the whirling star, Fufeng opened his mouth. I have 3 intentions. First, accept the whirling cultivator's allegiance. After all, we can still mine crystals here for at least 1,000 years. I hope that after 1,000 years, we can find a suitable substitute. Secondly, I will bring the cultivators who disrespected Xinyuan back to the 5th ring. The sect will decide their punishment. Finally, after returning this time, I will suggest that the future whirling star will be guarded by Yuanying Zhenren to ensure their safety. Do you have any objections? The true monarch asked for Jean Dan's opinion. This was very unusual. Jean Dan, who came with him, did not say a word. He knew that this question was not for him, but for Lu Xiaoyi, who had been here for 10 years. Lu Xiaoyi had no objections. Senior is wise. This disciple has nothing to say. Fufeng nodded and sent out a divine will. All the cultivators on the whirling star immediately knelt down. This was the first time that they had seen a true monarch. They did not dare to show any disrespect. In the future, they would have to rely on this leg to survive. They did not delay too much and put a large number of receiver crystals into their space bags. Of course, there were also 4 unlucky cultivators from the whirling star. The one-armed sunken river, the one-legged tumbler, the one-eyed fish master, and the one-eared giant hump. They all used the same trick. They allowed their bodies to be disabled, but did not repair them. In fact, they did this so that when the upper bound cultivators came, they would feel pity for them because they had been punished. Maybe they would be spared. They were very good at playing this trick. They have already arranged the affairs of the school. They're all smart people. They know very well that the current Hasa star is not a real upper-class world of cultivation. Because it is unstable, it can't give birth to a real cultivator of gathering vitality immediately. There will definitely be such a day in the future, but it will be thousands of years later, not now. Now, the only way to reach a higher level was to go to the upper bound, even if they had to go there to be punished. Each and every one of them was sly and cunning. Zhu Feng even sighed because he had only injured one of his ears. Wasn't this showing his lack of sincerity? However, with so many eyes watching, it was not good for him to hurt himself. It was very regretful. 2 hours passed quickly. When the people and the materials were on the raft, Fufeng asked, "The changes of the 5 elements and yin and yang here are obvious. Do you need to stay here for a few more days?" The changes of the 5 elements here could not escape the true monarch's perception. Of course, the drastic changes in his perception might be very insignificant in Jean Dan's perception. The reason why the old true monarch said this was not because of the 5 elements. He wanted to give Lu Xiaoyi a reason to stay. It was not clear whether this mission was a success or a failure. If it had to be judged from the result, it would probably be a failure. Although there were some things that the sect would not say, the death of the 2 fake Dan cultivators and the loss of your star, which had provided precious materials for Xuanyuan's external sword for thousands of years, were incomparable. The key was that this was not an uncontrollable process. Since Lu Xiaoyi could help the sect continue the production of receiver crystals on Whirling Star, why didn't he do it? What was the reason? Was it for personal cultivation or something else? From Fufeng's point of view, as a true monarch, Lu Xiaoyi's choice was undoubtedly correct. This was the choice of a true cultivator. However, since he had joined the sect, he was bound by the group. Sometimes, when he did things, he could not completely act from his own point of view. This was a contradiction between an individual and a group that could never be reconciled. For a cultivator at Fufeng's level to make such a choice, the sect would not say anything about it. With his level and status, the sect had no right to ask a true monarch to change his mind. However, for a puny gold core cultivator like Fufeng to do such a thing and cause the entire sect to have no receiver crystals to use for the next 1,000 years, this was a huge sin. It was precisely because of this that Fufeng gave him a chance to stay. In fact, the sect's hands could not reach here for the time being. They could only rely on the passage of time to dilute this mistake. Then, there would be elders stirring up the muddy water and smoothing out the relationship. If there was a chance to find another mineral star in the future, this mistake was likely to be all talk and no action. Although this was the cultivation world. In fact, some of the methods to deal with conflicts were no different from those in the mortal world. One delay, two disturbances, turning big problems into small ones and small ones into nothing. Of course, Liu Xiaoyi understood the old, true monarch's intention. However, first of all, he was close to the end of his enlightenment on Whirling Star. There was no point in continuing now. If he wanted to continue improving, he could only use time. Second of all, he was not a person who did not dare to face the responsibility. Maybe he was in the past, but not now. When he made the choice to deal with the surging spiritual vigor on Whirling Star, he did it based on his own state of mind. He did not think much about the problem of the sect's resources being cut off. He only cared about pretending, leaving a pile of *T for others to clean up. So what? With the existing mineral resources on Whirling Star, it would not be a problem to mine for thousands of years. If the Chinchio Peak's treasury was included, it would be easy to hold on for thousands of years. After such a long time, he could not find a replacement. Even if he was responsible, he could at most go to the universe to find a mineral to replace it after he became a nascent soul. It was not a big deal. Since it was clear that he wanted to train him, he had to show his own style of doing things. If you're not afraid of causing trouble, then use me. You have to be able to endure hardships and work according to rules. What are you thinking? Chapter 549. I think it's better for me to go back. I've been out for 10 years, and I'm starting to miss home. Fufeng looked at him deeply and did not say much. The six of them left on the floating raft, leaving behind the complicated looks of the indigenous cultivators. They had to endure being controlled like this for thousands of years. When would it end? The six of them, needless to say, Fufeng was someone who was sick of running around in the void of the universe. Although Liu Xiaoyi was still a Jin Dan who could not travel alone in the void, he had been out of the outer universe many times and was very familiar with it. Only the four curious babies on planet Hasa wished that they could grow a few more eyes along the way. Everything was new to them. This was a brand new world. Seeing such a mysterious universe, they felt that their cultivation journey was not in vain. As for what would happen when they went to the upper world and what kind of punishment they would receive, it didn't seem to be that important. Cultivation was like this. You would never know what was waiting for you in the future. It might seem like a disaster, but when you get closer, it might be a blessing. From afar, it might seem like a sweet date, but when you eat it, you will realize that it is a dung worm. However, if you did not go anywhere, you might be safer, but you would also lose the chance to change, whether it was good or bad. 3 years later, in the Sword Chi Soaring Pavilion. This was a rare meeting. All the big shots of the pavilion were present. Perfected Lord Zhou Jiong, perfected Lord Fu Feng, perfected Lord Gongli, and many other perfected Yuanying. Liu Xiaoyi did not know many of them. He only knew perfected Rui and perfected Huang Tao. There were no other Jin Dan disciples present. In such an occasion, they did not have the right to speak. This was related to the outer universe or star. This was an area that the Hall Master's Jin Dan could not meddle in. They had no right to speak. There were many perfected beings and perfected lords in the hall, but there was only one person in the hall. Liu Xiaoyi stood there, his heart filled with emotions. He was considered a very special person among the group of swords outside Chinchio Peak. He was interrogated when he first entered Xinyuan. Now that he was in Jin Dan, he was still interrogated. It seemed to have become a norm. In the circle of Dome Grand cultivators, he was probably the most frequently mentioned golden core cultivator. Well, he was also the most troublesome foundation cultivator. For someone like him who only wanted to be a rice worm, this was really unbelievable. The changes in the world left one helpless. The conference was hosted by True Monarch Gong Li. He was the true monarch in charge of external affairs in the Soaring Heaven Pavilion. Normally, he interacted with true monarchs and true monarchs, but today he had to face a small Jean Dan. For a small Jean Dan to be able to cause so much trouble, it was also a skill and ability to cause trouble. Jean Dan was not in the fifth ring to stir up trouble, but he was stirring up trouble outside the universe. This was a rare occurrence. Moreover, looking at this disciple's history, it wasn't the first time he caused trouble. When he was just a foundation establishment cultivator, he was already able to cause a commotion in the fifth ring. Now that he had improved, he was starting to invade the universe. If this kind of trash really became a nascent soul, what would he bring to Xianyuan? He was really looking forward to it. The normal questions and answers were over. There were not many strange things on this trip to Planet Hasa. Lu Xiaoyi did not mention the really strange things. First of all, he was not sure. Second of all, he was tired of this kind of endless questioning. He could not be completely honest. This was because there were more and more strange things on him. The storm caused by the sword spirit problem had just subsided. His life had finally become a little more normal after he succeeded in forming his gold core. Now he was involved in luck. What would the sect think? Sword spirit, luck, they were all at the highest level in cultivation, and he had them all. Even if the sect did not intend to cut him into pieces for research, he would still want to cut himself up. As for the kind-looking old man, the truth behind the 2 luck incidents of Bluebeard and Shaxing, he planned to completely understand at first. The cultivation world was a place where time was measured by years, or even centuries. There was no need to be too hasty. He also did not think that his concealment would cause any irreversible substantial impact to the sect or the fifth ring. He was just a Jean Dan. Many things that were extraordinary to him were nothing in the eyes of true monarchs and true monarchs. There was no reason for him to scare himself. But even if he did not say anything, for these real masters, they would be able to find some strange traces from the clues. Gongli went straight to the point. Billy of the 3 pure ones disappeared in the 80s or 90s. At that time, he was also a popular candidate for forming his gold core. Now it seems that he was sent to Planet Hasa when he was in the foundation building stage. Then, he formed his gold core there. This can also explain his various behaviors. But what we are curious about is how a foundation building cultivator could draw out the spiritual vigor under the blue bamboo shoots. This is the core of a planet. Not to mention a foundation building cultivator like him. Even true monarch Yuanying would find it difficult to do this. It is hard to imagine that he could do this without the help of others. You have to know that before he went to Planet Hasa, he did not know about the existence of the blue bamboo shoots. The 3 pure ones are indeed involved in a wide range of cultivation methods. But no matter how wide they are, it is impossible for a foundation-building cultivator to have the insight of a true monarch. What we want to know is, in the process of investigating the truth, did you feel that there were other hidden forces behind the scenes? Yes. Lu Xiaoyi did not avoid the question. The reason why I dawdled on Planet Hasa for nearly 2 years before taking action is that I want to figure out the force behind this. But it takes time, a lot of time. Billy has been on Planet Hasa for 80 years. Maybe this mysterious force has been there for even longer? Later, there was a change in the mind. I couldn't wait any longer, so I could only deal with the current situation. So, in my opinion, we should send True Monarch to Planet Hasa as soon as possible to stabilize the situation. Gong Li changed the topic. You said that you could also suppress the underground spiritual vigor, but you didn't do so. Why? Lu Xiaoyi had been mentally prepared for this. This was a hurdle he couldn't get around. The reason why I could suppress the spiritual vigor is that my spiritual power is not bad. The spiritual vigor in the core of Planet Hasa has already been alive. It has taken the illusion of an old turtle. It needs spiritual communication. I was lucky and took the initiative in the communication. But in terms of Taoist heart, We cultivators should not suppress the upgrade of a world because of resources. This is not in line with the Tao of Heaven, especially when the natives of planet Hasa have already known the truth. The change of people's minds is unstoppable. In fact, his last sentence is the truth. Talking about Taoist heart is just a helpless excuse. The truth is that all the cultivators on planet Hasa know about this matter. If you hide it, you will definitely have resentment. If it accumulates over time, it is not conducive to Xuanyuan's control. Sooner or later, something bad will happen. The so-called Taoist heart is something that I can deceive you when you don't know about it. But when you know about it, I will use it to save face. This is a very particular thing in the inheritance of Taoism. If you build an ant road for ants, will they follow the ant road? Will they be grateful to you? So it's better not to build it. But when the ants have intelligence, it's another thing to build an ant road for them. Chapter 550. Moreover, from a technical point of view, I can't guarantee that I'll be able to push the geocentric spiritual opportunity back. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't lying. He really didn't know if the old turtle would really obey him if he insisted that it return to its original place. That was hundreds of thousands of years of suppression, a thought that gave birth to intelligence. You want it to return to its original place of suppression for hundreds of thousands of years with just one sentence? Asking the old turtle to retreat 1,000 feet and returning it to its original place of the geocentric are two different concepts. My control over the spiritual opportunity is very limited, and I don't understand its profound mechanism. I'm afraid that if I go too far, it will become willful and I won't be able to get anything out of it. It's better to let it spread to the human world. At the very least, it will gain a good reputation in the whirling cultivation world. Lu Xiaoyi paused for a moment. Of course, from a personal point of view, using the spiritual opportunity to benefit the human world is beneficial to my mental state of cultivation. True monarch Zhou Jiong interjected. From the beginning to the end, have you never thought about the influence the sect will receive? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hesitate at all. No, a swordsman shouldn't rely on external objects. This is the philosophy I formed from the first day I entered Xianyuan. I have never doubted this. The grand cultivators in the seats were constipated. He used such an excuse to absolve himself. You really couldn't say that he was wrong. Lu Xiaoyi was still chattering. Spirit, will, philosophy, tradition, and so on. Among all the influences that can be mentioned, resources should be ranked last. This is because a small receiver crystal can have a profound influence on the sword vein tradition that has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. This is unimaginable. I have never doubted that if it were any of my senior brothers, they would have made the opposite choice. Therefore, I've never thought about the influence of the sect. In front of so many grand cultivators, he used the sect's tradition to dilute the sect's resources. Only he could think of such a thing. Lu Xiaoyi's thoughts could not be hidden from these old foxes who had lived for hundreds and thousands of years. He was also very clear on this point. What he expressed was nothing more than his strong desire to survive, as well as the appropriate reason to seek leniency within the rules. Everyone knew the truth, but it depended on which side you favored. The mistake had already been made, and Xianyuan would never ruin the future of his disciples because of this. He was alone in this world, and the sect had given him the greatest power to do whatever he wanted. Now, the result was that this guy used this power to seek personal benefits for his own Taoist heart, and even spouted a bunch of high-sounding principles. Actually, the main reason was that he didn't want his state of mind to be tainted and affect his future cultivation. It was that simple. Gongli didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Based on his attitude, he had to be punished. Why? Was it reasonable to destroy the sect's most important mineral source? You actually have a third option. Maintain the status quo and wait for your ancestor Fufeng. The geocentric spiritual opportunity has been accumulating for hundreds of thousands of years. Waiting for the last few years won't make a difference. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. With my cultivation, I can still suppress the natives in a short period of time. But if you want me to guard there for several years, once the natives' reinforcements arrive, I'm afraid I won't be able to control the situation. Moreover, I don't have the confidence to suppress the geocentric spiritual opportunity for 10 years. Fufeng spoke up for him from the side. The spiritual opportunity on Whirling Star is a bit strange. It's not completely self-generated. There should be a mysterious external force involved. I observed the formation of the great Tao laws at the scene, and it's not purely the nature of the spiritual opportunity. Therefore, it's indeed difficult for a Jin Dan like him to completely control the entire process. Zhou Jiong frowned. Junior martial brother, are you saying that there's an external force involved? Fufeng nodded. We can't judge its origin, but from the development of the matter, it can't be separated from the traces of human intervention. If we fail once, there will definitely be a next time. The several true immortals and perfected masters discussed for a moment, and they came to a conclusion. Lu Xiaoyi, let me ask you, when you made your choice, did you think from your own point of view first? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Yes. I said that I thought about the glory of the sect first, and then the future of my fellow disciples and the peace of the universe. But no one believed me. Reverend Rue shouted from the side. Grandmaster is asking you a question. Answer properly and speak human language. Don't be sarcastic and make it sound like you've been wronged. Lu Xiaoyi responded with a serious face. It wasn't that he was being sarcastic, but after so many years of observation, he discovered that within the Xinyuan sect, the Grandmaster level figures were actually very tolerant of their juniors. They were old and experienced. They had seen a lot. If you didn't make any fundamental mistakes, they would rarely deliberately make things difficult for you. Instead, it was the martial uncles and martial uncles who were more difficult to deal with. As grandmasters, they didn't like children who were well-behaved. This was a typical generational tolerance. Part of the reason is that the Ksitigarbha spiritual opportunity has been exposed. Another part of the reason is that the spiritual opportunity's upsurge can be controlled. But the main reason is that this disciple wants to have a perfect state of mind in the future. It's not that this disciple hasn't considered the loss of the sect. In any case, it shouldn't be a problem to hold on for a few thousand years. When this disciple becomes a nascent soul, I'll just go to the universe and look for a few rich minds. It's not a big deal. The group of reverends and perfected monarchs looked at each other. Gong Li was speechless. Go to the universe? A few rich minds? It's not a big deal. How dare you say that? Do you know that there are dozens of perfected monarchs and hundreds of reverends in our Xianyuan lineage? In the past 10,000 years, as long as we go out into the void of the universe, as long as there are strange celestial bodies, we'll go and investigate. We've never slacked off. Even so, there are only a few valuable minds in the universe. There's only one receiver mind, and it's the result of various coincidences. But when it comes to you, it's like a cabbage. You just go out for a walk, and it's so easy. You treat the interests of the sect like child's play. Who's your master? How did he teach you? Lu Xiaoyi said in fear and trepidation. I've never taken him as my master. Gongli did not give up. Which perfected master did you learn from? Reverend Rue was embarrassed. Cough, cough. Master about that. He learned from this disciple for 15 years. Gongli froze on the spot. How did this trouble fall on his head? The divine senses of the great cultivators collided, and they quickly reached a consensus. Although the trouble this time was indeed big and could affect the foundation of the external sword lineage for tens of thousands of years, they could not drag this guy out and behead him. Every swordsman was proud, not only of the inner sword, but also of the external sword. It was not the turn of a small Jin Dan to bear the responsibility of the rise and fall of the sect. As the group in charge of the sword Aura Soaring Heaven Pavilion, they also had the responsibility. Why did they not strengthen the security of this only receiver mind planet? Why did they not know that there was a mysterious power involved? Why did they only realize something that happened 100 years ago only now? Why did they send this unreliable guy to carry out the mission? A true cultivator must be responsible and would not shirk responsibility. If they did not have such basic qualities, how could they cultivate to the level of Yuanying? A perfected lord? After reaching a consensus, there was no need to discuss the follow-up arrangements with this small Jean Dan. Gong Li's eyebrows were as sharp as knives. The Soaring Heaven Pavilion has concluded that Qinsho Peak has no responsibility. Jean Dan's cigarette, but does not have to bear the main responsibility for the recovery of Hasa Star's spiritual opportunity. Finding out the cause of Jean Dan's death in the upper realm is considered meritorious, but watching Hasa Star's spiritual opportunity recover is a small mistake. Meritorious deeds offset the demerits. However, you secretly brought receiver crystals back to the mountain and hid 3 caddies, 2 tails, and 5 coins. I'll punish you. Chapter 551. If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. They even said that Lu Xiaoyi treated the interests of the sect like child's play. In fact, these perfected cultivators also treated the rules like child's play. In short, we agree with your explanation, but we still have to give you a small punishment because you have caused trouble for us. Those receiver crystals are for a friend, and I also bought them privately on Hasa Planet. Lu Xiaoyi's explanation was very weak. Gong Li was expressionless. Privately bought? I'll give you the spirit stones, and you can buy a few pound of them for me now. Lu Xiaoyi smiled awkwardly. Gong Li finally found a chance to attack this arrogant Jean Dan. This thing used the rules to cause a lot of trouble for these perfected cultivators. The price of goods in this world has always been divided into several parts. The ore price, the refining price, and the transportation cost. How much is the transportation cost to take a floating raft to Hasa Planet? Using public resources for private purposes, is this how you take advantage of the public? Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything. If these perfected cultivators wanted to mess with him, they could have countless reasons, and there was no need to argue. If this was a game, he had no choice but to play with these perfected cultivators and perfected cultivators. Wasn't it just a mission? Gong Li snorted. We have unanimously decided to send you back to your hometown, the Blue Sky World. You need to receive Xuanyuan's traditional education there. You need to learn the history of Xuanyuan's sword vein. The next time you think about a problem, you will put the interests of the sect first. If you don't accept the assignment, you're not allowed to come back, unless you can go out into the universe and find a few mineral veins similar to receiver crystals for the sect. Zhou Jiong smiled. I want to remind you that Blue Sky's treatment is limited by resources, and it may not be as rich as here in the 5th ring. This is also the reason why everyone is running here. In addition, Blue Sky is not very peaceful recently. Some small fish have been living comfortably for too long and have forgotten whose sky it is. I think you're doing quite well on Hasa Planet. You're acting big, and the rest of the planet is submitting to you. Go. Don't stay here and cause trouble for us. Go to Blue Sky. Lu Xiaoyi still wanted to make a final struggle. I can still change. Gong Li refused. You don't have to change it. Xin Yuan has never asked his disciples to change their personalities. We just send disciples with different personalities to the most suitable place for them. In half a year, there will be a ferry to Qinkong. You can take it. Lu Xiaoyi finally confirmed. Seniors, is this a mission? If it was a mission, how would the reward be calculated? Can I get an advance? Gong Li sneered. It's not a mission. You can also think of it as a form of exile. When you come back, the Sword Chi Soaring Heaven Pavilion will carve your relationship into a record. You can bring it over, and in the future, you will receive your salary and eat there. Seeing this little Jean Dan walk out with a confused expression, everyone in the pavilion burst into laughter. They were not too concerned about losing their receiver crystal source. Just as Lu Xiaoyi had analyzed, the buffer period was very long enough for them to discover something in the universe. Most importantly, because there was solid evidence that Bai Hoi, a cultivator of the 3 pure ones, was active on the whirling star, they had a reason to harass the ore rafts of the 3 pure ones in the void. They would take a share of all the similar soul-transmitting minerals of the 3 pure ones, regardless of whether the 3 pure ones were willing or not. Xian Yuan had suffered a loss, so how could they swallow it silently? Fu Feng frowned. He rarely participated in the plans of the Sword Qi Soaring Heaven Pavilion. He was an idle person, so it was best for him to travel in the void of the universe. He was just an idle person in the Soaring Heaven Pavilion. Therefore, he was not particularly clear about the recent problems in Qingkong. What happened in Qingkong? Do we still need to send people back? Even if we do, what's the point of sending a Jin Dan back? Zhou Jiong laughed. Junior brother, you should pay attention to the sex affairs when you have time. It's all recorded in the senior's record of events. Why didn't you read a single word? Qingkong's domain is a bit unstable. After tens of thousands of years, it's normal for some people to have thoughts about their ancestral land. Humans are always forgetful, and they need blood to wake up. However, since it's a matter of the domain, it's not good for Yuanying to intervene. Those sneaky people follow the rules very well because they're afraid of provoking the great cultivators of Xian Yuan to take revenge. However, they also make it difficult for us to sweep the area. Therefore, we can only send some capable Jin Dan back to suppress them. You also know that there are very few outstanding people left in Qingkong. Those with potential are all sent to the 5 rings crossing gold. Therefore, they are at a disadvantage when fighting against other people's elites. It's also a joke. There's no need to take this too seriously. If we send a large number of people back, it would make Xian Yuan look bad. Therefore, we only plan to send one person back who can kill people. On this matter, our outer sword and inner sword fought very fiercely. In the end, only this little guy called Cigarette but gained the recognition of both sides. The outer sword treats him as one of us, and the inner sword doesn't treat him as an outsider. Therefore, Fu Feng laughed. So it turns out that regardless of the matter of planet whirling, he still has to go back. You guys are so pretentious. Do you have to go so far? Zhou Jiong sighed. This little guy is too good at causing trouble. He has been causing trouble since he was in the Foundation establishment stage. First, he caused trouble in the dome, then he caused trouble in the fish leaping cliff, and now he has conquered a domain. These are all big scenes. If he can handle them, it means that he is also capable in this aspect. It's not enough for a swordsman to only know how to kill people. He also needs to know how to kill people. Who to kill and who to pull. Who to attack and who to isolate and unite. There are many powerful sword cultivators among the gold core cultivators, and they are not young either. They have a wide network of connections, and they have concerns. There will always be a time when they can't display their full potential. Therefore, we want to send a new face over. He is bold and powerful, and we don't have to be afraid of him. He can go all out and do it. After that, we will come forward and mediate. Gong Li also laughed. He likes to show off. My principle in Xian Yuan is to give him a stage to show off. As long as he can show off, I don't mind helping him wipe his ass. Of course, this was also under the tacit approval of Wen Guangfeng and the Thunder Palace. If it were someone else, the inner sword would not have been so easy to talk to. Gong Li then turned to Zhenren Rui. The matter of planet whirling cannot be left unchecked. We used to be stationed in Jindan, including the investigation of cigarette butts. No matter how much he investigates, he is limited by his strength and realm. Some things are hard to find. You have to choose someone from Yuanying. He has to be cautious and reliable. His strength cannot be weak. That place is likely to become a place of trouble. We need to establish communication. We can't wait until the soul lamp is extinguished to find out that something has happened there. You go and set up a plan. Zhenren Rui nodded. In the Rising Heaven Pavilion, the sages all set the general direction. They did not care about the specific operations or the allocation of personnel. This was also a characteristic of Xian Yuan. More than 10,000 years ago, Xian Yuan still had the position of sect leader. However, after 10,000 years of development, they found that it was not necessary. The power of Xian Yuan was in the hands of the Thunder Palace and the Rising Heaven Pavilion. It would be very awkward to have an additional sect leader. Their will could not be conveyed, and no one was willing to do such a thankless job. Therefore, they decided to just cancel it. The matter they discussed in the Rising Heaven Pavilion today was the final decision. At most, they would inform the Thunder Palace afterwards. Chapter 552. Lu Xiaoyi walked out of the soaring heaven pavilion in a daze. He still did not understand why he was kicked back to Clear Sky by the sect. Clear Sky might be Xuanyuan's base, but might not be Lu Xiaoyi's hometown. His hometown was in the lower 3-star region. Seeing that the 5th ring was about to pass through his hometown, he went in the opposite direction. However, with his current Jin Dan level, even if he passed by his hometown, he would not be able to go up, right? The great cultivators in the sect would not waste time and resources to send a Jin Dan back to his hometown just because he wanted to bring glory to his ancestors. Therefore, it did not matter. Faced with this kind of mission, or rather exile, the first person he thought of was senior sister Yansheng. She was old Clear Sky, so she would definitely be familiar with the people and geography there. Although information about Clear Sky could be seen everywhere in the Boa Tower, and it was the most comprehensive star region in Xuanyuan's treasury, it was one thing to read about it, and another to listen to people talk about it. He didn't expect that when he rushed over in such a hurry, he would end up with nothing. Yansheng had already left the dome to explore the 5th ring mission. This made him very disappointed. He didn't have to get anything from his senior sister, but he knew that this senior sister was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. She was very homesick and often missed the blue sky of her hometown. If there was scenery that she missed, there would definitely be people that she missed. The distance between Clear Sky and the 5th ring was too far, not to mention Jin Dan cultivators like them. Even Yuaning Jinren, who could float in the void, might not have a chance to go back. This was a rare opportunity. At least he could help senior sister see the people and things she cared about. Yansheng's mission was not difficult to find. It was a mission to lead Foundation establishment cultivators to participate in a spiritual assembly, just like when he went to temple to participate in 100 vine barges. However, this was a grand event for Foundation establishment cultivators. Their current mission was to escort them from afar. In the 5th ring, there were as many spiritual assemblies as there were hairs on a cow. This was the place where spiritual connections flourished. There were all kinds of strange things. The big powers would organize big events, the small powers would organize small events, and the small powers would organize together. There were all kinds of names and rules, and the purpose was to build relationships and increase connections. In a place like the 5th ring, connections were very important. This was because the small and medium-sized sects lived in the cracks between the big powers. How could there be balance? You don't even know him, so you can't talk to him. You're not old friends. Where did the connections come from? After Jin Dan's Yuanying, it would be very difficult to establish friendships between cultivators. This was because the more they saw, the more things they had to consider. It would be very difficult for them to open their hearts to each other. Therefore, most of the Dharma assemblies above the 5th ring were the Foundation establishment Dharma assemblies. This was because there were still gaps in their mental state among all the cultivation realms. The spiritual assembly that Smoky Inns led was very special. Using the concepts from Lu Xiaoyi's previous life, it was a women's assembly, 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 and so on. This kind of convention was held on a large scale within the entire 5th ring, and there were also branches in various regions. For example, this time, it was the Women's Convention in the Western regions. It was held once every 30 years. Everyone sat together to exchange friendships, share their sorrows, recall the past, summarize the present, and look forward to the future. This time, the location of the assembly was Splendid Garden. It was held by a sect in the Western regions, where Yin flourished and Yang declined. It was quite far from the dome, and there was the possibility of traveling to other places for sightseeing. It was hard to say how long it would take, and he might not be able to make it back before leaving the 5th ring. The relationship between the Xianyuan sword faction and Splendid Garden was very ordinary. The Kuan cultivators of Splendid Garden seemed to prefer elegant Dharma Meridian cultivators, but they were not interested in the unyielding swordsmen. In the Western regions, the sects could communicate with each other instantly. However, that was only for important matters between the sections. For personal matters like this, there was no reason to use the sect's communication system. In other words, he had no way of contacting Smokey Inns unless Smokey Inns took the initiative to contact the sect. He decided to make a trip personally. His speed was very fast, and it was completely different from Smokey Inn's flying devices. He estimated that a trip to Splendid Garden would take less than 2 months. There was still time. There was still half a year before the sect sent the ferry to the Blue Sky sect. During this time, it would be very difficult for him to calm down and cultivate. For Jean Dan, one deduction of martial arts would take at least a few months. What could he do in such a short time? Instead of being uncomfortable in the dome, it was better to go out and relax. Finally, he could see the beautiful scenery of the fifth ring. He had a hunch that this trip to the Blue Sky sect would not be short. He was afraid that it would take at least 100 years. If he could not form his nascent soul, it was hard to say whether he would be able to come back. He needed to say goodbye to his friends. At the same time, he also needed to think about what he needed to take with him during the trip. He liked to think about problems while flying, and this process was just right. There was no need to report to anyone. Now, no one would care about his situation. The palace masters of Jean Dan could not control him, and he was too lazy to go to the High Heaven Pavilion. He wanted to see the two loathsome brothers. Thus, he flew out of the dome and headed towards the southwest. Ever since he formed his gold core, his cultivation had been very regular for the first 20 years. On Whirling Planet, he could be considered to have achieved some success. He had laid a solid foundation on the Tao of the 5 elements, so he did not waste much time. For him, cultivation also had its own difficulties. It had been nearly 100 years since the birth of the last sword spirit of the Navy on the fish-leaping cliff, but no sword spirit had been born. He did not know what the problem was. Perhaps he was gradually becoming ordinary? The progress of the sword spirit had stagnated, but it was compensated by the luck-intercepting cloud. He, who had integrated with nature's luck, now had the possibility of soaring in another aspect. He did not know what the final result would be, but subconsciously, he knew that this was very important. It would be of great help to his future understanding of the Tao realm. In terms of the cultivation system, there was not much difference between the fifth ring and Qin Kong. Basically, Qin Kong had everything that the fifth ring had, especially those core things. Therefore, he did not need to go to the Boa Tower to plunder some cultivation techniques that he might practice in the future. Instead, it would mess up his rhythm. However, Qin Kong did not have enough resources and materials. Jinren Rue had also reminded him of this. After all, this was a bandit's den, and materials were extremely abundant. It was not as peaceful as Qin Kong, where there were few cultivators and they would not drift in the universe. Who could he rob? In careful planning, Lu Xiaoyi did not stop. The Jean Dan swordsman who appeared in the sky above the western regions rarely dared to provoke him. He did not cause trouble either. Occasionally, he would turn a blind eye to the attacks of the spiritual vigor. He did not have the time to care about these things. So focused on flying, it only took him about 20 days to enter the territory of Jinxiu Garden. The surrounding scenery became beautiful, completely different from the magnificent snow-capped mountains on the dome. As he continued to go deeper, there were already cultivators of Jinxiu Garden politely coming up to ask him questions. He suddenly realized that he was a man. How could he openly enter the scene of the women's conference? Chapter 553. When Lu Xiaoyi got closer to the meeting place, he realized that he was overthinking things. Women's assembly was not something you could understand from the word list. It was an all-women's gathering. Just as men's gatherings were always adorned with beautiful maids, women, in their pursuit of equality, used a lot of mediocrity in their large gatherings. They were basically Qianxiu and Foundation Establishment Qianxiu, so they weren't hard to find. Splendid Garden itself was a force where Yin flourished and Yang declined, but that didn't mean that they didn't exist. In addition to the wild bees and butterflies among the surrounding small sects and rogue cultivators, it was enough for a conference. There were always people who wanted to use some kind of shortcut to achieve their goals. The resource-poor Kuan Xiu hoped to pave the path of cultivation through so-called Dao companions. The Qin Xiu, who had no food left at home, also wanted to take a step forward through dual cultivation. In the cultivation world, this kind of happy cultivation would never go out of style. Instead, it was becoming more and more mainstream, large-scale, and industrialized. Lu Xiaoyi rarely came into contact with these things because he had been placed in the most powerful forces of this star field from the very beginning and had quickly made a name for himself. He had always been at the top of the food chain, and the levels he came into contact with were also very high, making cultivation a very easy thing. In fact, real cultivation was not like this. The Kuan-Shou conference was located in an open area called the Mountain and Water Swamp. It was a large swamp very far away from Splendid Gardens Mountain Gate. A swamp, as the name implied, was a place where poisonous miasma ran rampant, ferocious beasts lurked around, and dense with traps. It was a place where mortals were extinct. The Mountain and Water Swamp was originally such a place, but that was 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years later, under the perseverance of the people of Splendid Garden, the Mountain and Water Swamp was reborn. They used facts to tell others that the swamp actually had a beautiful side. The sword range would never do such a boring thing. Whatever it was now. They would not make any changes to the dome. However, Splendid Garden would not. They did not have the strength to choose the territory they liked. They were passively assigned here. They could only use the power of cultivation to change nature. Fortunately, their orthodoxy was very good in this aspect. This was also the reason why they were close to the Dharma vein. Various kinds of beautiful swamp plants were transplanted, countless pure herbivorous animals were raised, and the 5 elements under the swamp were imperceptibly influenced. Even though the change was very slow, after more than 10,000 years of persistence, the mountains and rivers of the swamp had completely changed. This was the choice of a Confucian orthodoxy that loved beauty. There was no good or bad about it. Everyone had their own eyes. At least from Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, the poisonous insects in the original Shanshui swamp were innocent. They were almost extinct in the place where they lived because they were not beautiful. The current landscape was completely different. Looking down from the sky, one could see flowers blooming like a piece of brocade, thousands of miles of beautiful scenery. The miasma was gone, and the poisonous insects were extinct. It was like a huge paradise on Earth. Of course, mortals still couldn't enter. They would still be trapped and become fertilizer for the swamp. The poisonous miasma was gone, but there was still the flower miasma, which was equally fatal. It was very suitable to hold a gathering of Kuan cultivators in such a place. Colorful clothes and fresh flowers set off each other. Laughter accompanied the cries of cranes, and there were no signs of a bandit's lair. There were no defensive formations and no cultivators on duty. The women's gathering in the 5th ring was the safest gathering. No one would be blind enough to come and cause trouble, because you would never know who was standing behind them. If you weren't careful, you would end up as an enemy of the entire region. Therefore, the women's gathering was very open. They didn't reject strangers. Kuan guests were welcomed, and Qin guests were entertained. As long as you showed respect to the Kuan cultivators, it was fine. The nature of such a gathering was very attractive. Of course, Qin cultivators with real prospects and potential wouldn't come. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Lu Xiaoyi dressed himself in a straw hat. This was because he had been too conspicuous at the fish-leaping cliff. Tens of thousands of Foundation establishment cultivators had looked at him for 10 years. This appearance was no longer a secret in the 5th ring. He was the most famous red cultivator back then. Although he was a little past his prime now, he still had the Foundation. It was certain that he would be recognized at such a gathering. The straw hat meant to tell others openly that he didn't want to reveal his identity due to personal reasons. It was a kind concealment and not a deliberate use of a secret technique to change his appearance. It was fine if he wasn't discovered, but if he met someone who was sensitive in this aspect, it would be easy for others to misunderstand. Although it was a gathering of Foundation establishment cultivators, there were also many Jin Dan cultivators like Yin Chun who had led teams. Their skills were profound, especially the Dharma Meridian cultivators. This was especially true for women. They had terrifying talent in the aspect of appearance. Lu Xiaoyi didn't dare to show his slight skill in front of them. However, his eyes weren't idle. They were watery, ripe, and had been used by pigs, but had never been used by pigs. They were a feast for the eyes. It was also a pity that he only found out about such a good gathering now. Even if he did, it was too late. He was about to leave this place full of life. It was melancholy. In his impression, the so-called home, the so-called place where the sword was drawn, Qing Kong was a place for retirement, right? A place for retirement also meant that it was dry, boring, and monotonous. This might have been suitable for his previous mindset as a rice worm, but not now. Life was like this. When you wanted to be a rice worm, the heavens would definitely throw you into a bandit's den. When you were used to the bandit's way of life, the heavens would throw you back into a rice bag. However, before his beauty viewing experience even began, it ended. A Foundation establishment, Jin Xiu, female cultivator, came up to him. His attire wouldn't be a problem outside, but in this place, he didn't fit in with the atmosphere. Everyone else had pretty faces, but he had a straw hat that obscured his face. He was dressed in black, and it was especially out of place. Everyone else was admiring the flowers and grass, but he was carrying a big sword case. Where are you from, esteemed guest? Do you need the Jin Xiu to guide you? The Jin Xiu female cultivator was very courteous. Although she couldn't discern the cultivation level of the Jin Dan under Lu Xiaoyi's divine concealment spell, she couldn't neglect the sword case on his back. The only thing she wasn't sure of was which sword vein this guest was from. Xinyuan? Wei Sword Mountain? Yinding? From a geographical point of view, the possibility of it being a Xinyuan swordsman was the highest. However, from the way things were done, there had never been a Xinyuan male swordsman who took the initiative to participate in such activities. The Wei Sword Mountain was even more so. Instead, it was the Yunding swordsman who was the most likely. They had a good relationship with the Dharma sect. If he was really from the Yunding, she had to remind him to be careful. There was also a group of female tigers from the Dongding participating in this event. There's no need to trouble yourself. Just tell me where the Xinyuan swordsman is, and I'll go there myself. Looking at the cautious expression on the little Jin Xiu's face, he suddenly understood and laughed. You're thinking too much. I'm also from Xinyuan. I'm looking for them for something, not for a fight. The Shanshui swamp was thousands of miles wide. In such an occasion, it wasn't appropriate to use one's divine sense to scan the area. It was disrespectful. Lu Xiaoyi came from a big family, and he placed great importance on such etiquette. This was also the best way to reduce trouble. He wasn't the main character of a novel who attracted hatred everywhere. Chapter 554. Kuan Xiu dutifully led him to the Xinyuan swordsman's encampment. He only left when he saw that he had a normal conversation with a swordsman. He was very careful. Where's your martial Aunt Yin Song? Where did she go? Lu Xiaoyi acted like an old man. He still did not want anyone to know of his arrival, even if it was a disciple of his own sect. His reputation in the external sword sect was a small legend and would attract more curious gazes. In essence, he was the kind of person who would not tell others how awesome he was. This gave him a sense of satisfaction. The female swordsman had a heroic look on her face. Martial Aunt went to meet some friends and will be back later. Hey, who are you? Are you hiding your head and tail and not daring to show your face? I've never seen any of the disciples of Qinshu Peak like you. You're a disgrace to our sword vein. Lu Xiaoyi lowered his voice and chuckled. Your martial aunt knows who I am. As for you guys, I'm not sure. I'm afraid your martial aunt will be unhappy. The heroic sword cultivator was very suspicious, but he had the sword talisman in his hand and the sword case with him, so it couldn't be fake. He kept staring at him, thinking in his heart, could it be that this is Martial Uncle's lover? I've never heard of it. Martial Aunt is a famous ice fairy in Qinshu Peak. How could she have such a thing in private? Moreover, it's a guy who doesn't even dare to show his face. Lu Xiaoyi ignored her. Since he was going to meet up with his friends, he didn't mind spending some time here. Since he was here, he could just take a stroll around. It would be a feast for his eyes before he left the Fifth Ring Road. Thus, he began to wander around. Although his face was covered by a straw hat, his eyes were bright, and he imitated him. That heroic sword cultivator was worried, so he kept following behind him. Both of them were carrying sword sheaths, and they seemed to be companions. Thus, no one came up to ask anything. There were countless beauties in the mountains and lakes, which made Lu Xiaoyi sigh. He had always been focused on cultivation, which made his life seem a lot paler. It was a pity that he was missing Ziyi. Life had to be colorful. It was not to say that a cultivator only cared about cultivation. That was incomplete. Cultivation was a systematic project. It was not limited to mana and sword techniques. Things on the spiritual level were also very important. It could allow a cultivator to have a complete personality and not be a tool for cultivation. It was only after he formed his gold core that he began to gradually understand these things. When he was in the foundation building realm, in order to survive in a bandit's den, he had no choice but to give up a lot of happiness in life. Now that he had a certain amount of ability to survive, he couldn't continue to cultivate so painstakingly. While he was strolling in front, the heroic swordsman behind him was taking notes in her heart. She was a very talented person in management, and she was also consciously developing in this direction. She was very organized and good at using data to speak for herself. For example, while tailing him, she carefully distinguished this person's characteristics and preferences and made a chart for him in her heart. When this person looked at people, the first thing he looked at was not the face, but the chest, followed by the buttocks, the figure, and finally the face. There was also a very important discovery. Based on the length of his gaze, this person spent far more time looking at those who had a cultivation partner or were married than those who were unmarried. Whether a five-ringed Kuan cultivator had a cultivation partner or not, one could basically tell from their hairstyle. Women and young girls were different. Of course, experts did not need to look at their hairstyle. They could also tell from their figure. She had recorded all these in a small notebook in her heart. She just had to wait for her martial uncle to come back and complain. As he wandered around the mountains and lakes, Lu Xiaoyi discovered a strange phenomenon. There were clusters of flowers in the lakes, but there was only one type that was tightly shut with wide leaves. It did not emit fragrance and was not beautiful. This did not make sense. It was the end of spring and the beginning of summer, and the climate in this area was mild. Looking at the flourishing leaves, it was the time of the year when vitality was the most vigorous. Why was it so abnormal? His knowledge of plants was very limited. His pitiful knowledge came from the few species in Pu City's Lu province. As for the impressions from his previous life, they were meaningless here. They were not a plant system. After 200 years of cultivation, there were too many things that needed to be learned. It was not enough for him to put effort into plants and flowers. Therefore, he did not recognize this plant. However, this type of plant was widely distributed in the mountains and swamps. There were at least 100 million of them in a radius of 1,000 miles. As a whole, their leaves were closed, causing the landscape of the mountains and swamps to lose some color, although he did not know what color it was. It was very strange to leave such a regret in such a grand event. However, he did not want to do anything. He did not even want to ask anything. He was a layman when it came to plants. Appropriate concealment of his shortcomings was the most basic quality of a pretender. The sky gradually darkened. Lu Xiaoyi began to walk back. Following behind him was the heroic swordsman who had worked hard without complaint for half a day. Her little notebook was almost full. It was enough to make this guy suffer. Nighttime was meaningless to cultivators. They did not have the habit of resting at sunset like mortals. Although most of the people here were Kuan cultivators, there were always heroic and generous people who sang to their heart's content. However, every low-level cultivator would not waste the time of the heavens at night. Everything would make way for the heavens. This was the source of their power. Cultivation depended on diligence, and desolation depended on pleasure. Everyone understood this. When he arrived at the Xianyuan swordsman's encampment in the mountains and lakes, the situation in front of him was beyond his expectations. More than 100 Xianyuan female swordsmen were gathered here. There were both outer sword and inner sword. Moreover, there were still people coming back. It was really a big lineup. Lu Xiaoyi did not know that there were so many women in his sect. Each of them was full of heroic spirit. It seemed very normal in the tens of thousands of Foundation establishment cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi saw his senior martial sister from afar. There was also someone he did not expect, the inner sword Gong Xiaodai. This was also very normal. With so many Foundation establishment cultivators here, it was normal for there to be a Jin Dan from each of the inner and outer sword vein. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, he could not show too much eagerness, especially when there were two of them. Who to greet first was a test of his IQ. Therefore, he let the follower rush to the front. After whispering to each other, Yin Sheng came forward. Gong Xiaodai gestured from a distance and turned around. Look at her IQ. She was several streets ahead of Lu Xiaoyi. Looking at the guy under the straw hat, Yin Sheng did not know whether to laugh or cry. Little E, if you go out now, you'll look like a typical flower thief. Lu Xiaoyi gladly accepted. There are too many flowers. Even a thief's eyes are blurred. There's so many orioles and swallows. It's so annoying. Yin Sheng keenly turned around and looked in the direction Gong Xiaodai left. You know her? When did you hook up with her? I've never heard of her. Your mission is so urgent, but you still have time to do these things? Lu Xiaoyi was very dissatisfied. Senior martial sister, your words are too harsh. We're just friends, okay? She's from my hometown. Among the 10 people who were abducted together, she was the only one who reached this step. The others are all. Chapter 555. After their brief exchange, Yin Sheng was bewildered. Little Li, did you just come back? I didn't hear anything from you when I left after accepting the mission. Why are you in such a hurry? Is there something urgent? Lu Xiaoyi smiled mischievously as usual. Isn't it because I miss you, senior sister? A month apart feels like 3 years. I haven't seen you for more than 10 years. You don't even know how much I miss you. Smokey interrupted his mushy words. In the end, you came here to look at other people's girls? Little E, you need to change that habit of yours. You'll get beaten up. All right, let's talk like a normal person. What's the matter? The two stood shoulder to shoulder and walked to a corner of the station. Of course, they couldn't escape the eyes of the hundreds of female swordsmen. Yin Sheng didn't care about it, and Lu Xiaoyi didn't care about it either. He just let these guys think whatever they want. I accepted a new mission. In 4 to 5 months, I'll be going to Qing Kong on the ferry. I don't think I'll be able to come back anytime soon. I'm worried that you won't be able to make it back in time. So I came to find you. I want to know if there's anything you need me to do in Qing Kong. For example, if there's a sister who needs me to take care of her, I can give her warmth for free. Listening to Lu Xiaoyi's habit of talking nonsense, Yin Shen knew that he was concerned about her. She did have a lot of people and things that she missed in the Green Sky sect. Unfortunately, she couldn't go back. She also knew that the reason why the sect allowed Lu Xiaoyi, a foreign cultivator, to go back was definitely not because he was familiar with the Green Sky sect. There must be another purpose. This was not something she should ask. She had a lot of things to worry about, but she couldn't put them all on her friends. There were some things that she had to deal with on her own. There were some things that she could only think about but not touch. Of course, there were also some things that she had to entrust. She had been in the 5th ring for more than 200 years. There were some things that she couldn't afford to delay. If she really went back after she became a nascent soul, many people and things would be gone. There had to be a conclusion, even if it wasn't a good one. The conversation between the two lasted for the first half of the night, causing the hundreds of female swordsmen's curiosity to burn even more fiercely. They scratched their ears and cheeks, unable to find a place to put their thoughts. When did the famous Ice Mountain Fairy fall? Just by looking at the way they were conversing with one another, one could tell that their relationship was definitely not simple. Their heads were very close to one another, shoulder to shoulder. They could even sense one another's spiritual perception. Was there a need for that? However, what shocked them even more was that after this masked man had intimate interactions with the outer sword Jin Dan in the first half of the night, he actually ran over to the inner sword Gong Xiao Dai in the second half of the night. Similarly, they stood shoulder to shoulder and whispered into each other's ears. This made people puzzled. What kind of triangular relationship was this? Was the private life of a dome swordsman really that messy? It was already dawn. Lu Xiaoyi and Gong Xiaodai actually did not talk much about anything else. They mostly talked about the past of old friends. In fact, they did not interact much. Apart from the fact that they both came from the same planet, there was almost no interaction between them on the Five Rings. However, only Lu Xiaoyi knew that under Gong Xiaodia's flirtatious appearance, her heart towards the sword was not inferior to senior sister Yin Cheng's in the slightest. It was only because of their personalities that they presented themselves differently to the outside world. Both of them had a dedication towards the sword, perseverance towards the Tao, and a strong will to move forward alone. Counting from the time that the lower 3 stars stepped onto the airship to receive Chao Wang, almost 240 years had passed. Out of the 10 of them, only the 2 of them were left. This was truly cruel. Under the erosion of time, it was even crueler than the flying swords. I don't care what your reason is for coming here. I don't care about the mask, but you can stop pretending to be a cultivator. Even I can see it, let alone those experts with Dharma meridians. Furthermore, as a foundation establishment cultivator, it's not suitable for you to mingle with a group of women. It's easy for people to talk about Xuan Yuan's innocence. It's more natural for you to come here as an escort for Jin Dan. Yes, Lu Xiaoyi's mood was very calm. His fellow countrymen had all fallen behind. It all depended on how long the 2 of them could last. He still had to experience this kind of relationship in the future, and no one could predict it. Early in the morning, after the end of the heavenly ceremony, it was the beginning of another joyous day. When the Xinyuan cultivators discovered the powerful aura emitted by the masked guest, they came to a realization. How could the 2 martial uncles take a fancy to an ordinary person? As expected, it was another martial uncle Jin Dan. The question was, which one was it? Don't you need to go back and prepare? All kinds of resources. Blue sky is definitely not as abundant as the 5 rings. Yin Cheng asked. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. You'll never be able to prepare everything, because you'll never know how far you'll go. What do you need to use? You can only take one step at a time. Besides, doesn't blue sky have other sects? If you really don't have enough resources, you can always ask them for help. There's no need to force yourself into a corner right now. I won't be able to see senior sister for a long time. I'll stay here for a few more days and chat with senior sister. Yin Cheng immediately exposed him. You don't want to chat with me. You just can't let go of all these beautiful women, right? Little E, let me tell you, it's not that senior sister is boasting, but in terms of beauty, blue sky is even better than the 5 rings. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes lit up. Listening to senior sister's words is better than studying for 10 years. If you say so, then I'm willing to go. Yin Cheng couldn't do anything about him. This guy's sloppy attitude was fused into his blood and couldn't be changed. In fact, she didn't want him to change either. Only then would she feel closer to him, like a family member, a younger brother who would never grow up. I still can't accompany you during the day. There are some things I need to discuss. You're going to look around anyway, so it suits you. Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful. What's there to discuss between you two? It's all about those trivial matters between women. You're doing it so formally. Don't tell me you want to overturn the 5 rings and seize power? Turn this place into a matriarchal society? Of course, I'll support you unconditionally. Yin Cheng was annoyed. Nothing good comes out of dog's mouth. How are we not serious matters? For example, right now, in Mountain River Swamp, there's something that can't be considered a big deal. Those crabapple bananas suddenly stopped blooming, causing the sisters to worry. Forget it. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Even if all the flowers and plants in Mountain River Swamp died, you wouldn't care, right? Lu Xiaoyi reacted. Crabapple bananas? Are you talking about those autistic flowers and plants? I was wondering why this Mountain River Swamp was missing something. So it was an accident. I wonder what kind of accident would cause a plant species to not give you face. Yin Chung sighed. There's no reason at all. The mount of a fellow Taoist who was participating in the conference inexplicably bit the crabapple banana master of Mountain River Swamp. In the end, the two sides fought fiercely. The flower master couldn't move and wasn't good at fighting, so it suffered a great loss. So overnight, all the crabapple bananas in Mountain River Swamp closed their leaves and shut their flowers. That's what you're seeing now. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.